And go live.
And we're live, she says. All right. Well, I'll echo what Madison said. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thanks for supporting Jimmy's and coming out for all these tying events. Hopefully, I won't bore you to death, just a little bit, because I am pretty good at boring people. In case you don't know me, my name's Lance Egan. I have worked in fly fishing stuff since about the mid-90s. So in my lifetime, a fairly long time. For some of you, that's not such a long time. For some of you, it was before you were born. I've worked with fly fish food since 2017, and I want to just walk through some of my favorite patterns with you today. I'm going to try and keep my voice. Madison made me do a nymphing clinic last night, and I talked way too much, right? And so I'll probably have to clear my throat a few times. I apologize for that, but I'm just going to walk you through a few of my favorite flies. I didn't bring stuff to tie anything and everything, but I brought stuff to tie most of my commercially available patterns, and then maybe a few others that a few other flies that are maybe a little bit more unique. A couple of dry flies we can do that are some Spanish style dry flies I learned from my friend Pablo in Spain. Otherwise, I may just tie a couple to kind of get us started, and then if somebody has something specific that, especially of mine, that I brought that I can tie for you, I'd love to demonstrate something you'd like to see, rather than me just dictating exactly what I'm going to tie. I did this, I don't think I came last year, it was 2 years ago. Is that right? So some of you may have been here for that one. So I told Madison I thought that I wrote down notes on exactly what I tied last time, so I wouldn't repeat everything. I'm sure I'm going to repeat some of them, because some of my patterns I'll just tie every time I tie, but I couldn't find it in my notes, so I don't know what I tied last time. I have an idea of some of them that I tied, but anyway, I thought I'd start us off by just doing a Rainbow Warrior, since that is my oldest and longest tenured and probably still my best-selling fly of all time. So the Rainbow Warrior is a really simple midge pattern. The original used a glass bead like this. So this is a 2487 number 20. You could tie this big. I tie Rainbow Warriors from about a size 12 all the way down to like 22s. This is, like I say, a Tiemco and a 20. I've got a glass bead on there, just one of the midge killer caddis glass beads. And oh, see, we got the producer Madison going here. I got to switch cameras. You can tie these with tungsten beads. You can tie these on jig hooks. You can tie them when I tie them with tungsten, I usually use silver beads. We also have a new version out that's a pink beaded version. I'm also getting used to tying with glasses in my advanced middle age. I started this. I did a tying demo for Charlie's Fly Box, Charlie Craven in Colorado earlier this year. And I was tying flies at home a few days before that. And I just bought these, and I wasn't sure I wanted them yet. Wasn't sure I needed them yet. And I tied some hoppers, and I tied with these to practice, because I'd never tied with glasses before. And I tied the first hopper, and I thought, my goodness, I must be rusty, because that thing is awful. And I threw it in a pile. I tied a second one, and it was equally as bad. I threw it in a pile. I tied a third one, not much better. Threw it in a pile. Thought maybe it's the glasses. So I took the glasses off, and I tied a fourth one. And I'm like, that one looks pretty dang good. I threw it in the pile, tied a fifth one. Looked pretty good, threw it in the pile, and then I took the glasses off. I had the glasses off. I looked at all of them in the pile, and I'm like, they all look exactly the same to me. I can't tell them apart. I put the glasses back on and realized I probably need the glasses, especially for small stuff. I can still tie on most things pretty well, but really small flies, these are going to be the norm. The funniest thing that happened to me at Charlie's was they had a TV, but it was off to my right. Well, I had two of them, so I could see either side, and I kept looking at the TV with these on, because I'm not used to glasses, and I'd go, see, you can see, never mind, you guys can't see that. It's kind of blurry on the screen. Didn't realize that these were making it blurry. So bear with me on the glasses. They're new to me. Let's get started tying, though. If you have questions about something I'm doing, if I'm not looking up, you can raise your hand, but if I'm not looking up, just blurt out a question. Stop me at any point. Ask anything you like. I won't know all the answers, I'm sure, but if I have an answer, I'll try and give it my best shot. So I'm just going to tie with some UTC 70 red thread. The red thread for this fly is fairly crucial. It changes the color of the fly. So you can also tie these the rainbow ware with other colors of thread. I've tied them with fluorescent orange, with fluorescent pink. I've actually even tied them with black before, but I keep coming back to the red. It seems to work best for me. But because I'm going to use a pearl tinsel on there, the thread color underneath will show through and it'll change the color of the fly a little bit. So I started the thread. I'm just going to wind it back down the shank just a little bit. And then we're just going to tie in a little bit of pheasant tail. We don't need very much of this, maybe 4 strands or so, 5 strands, somewhere in there max. You could also substitute this with Coq de Leon, would work just fine. The original used pheasant tail, and it fishes really well for me, so I tend to just keep using pheasant tail. One hack there I just did, I tend to tie fast, so I tied commercially for a long time, and so if I do something that I didn't describe well like I did there, I just pulled the pheasant tail off instead of cutting it. Pretty easy to do, just one less step. I like tying with scissors in my hands. You can set them down, of course, if it makes you more comfortable. Because I keep them in my hand, I just keep them on one thumb. That way I kind of open it by grabbing the scissor with my middle finger. Then I'm just going to take some of this Vivas pearl tinsel and tie it in just right behind the bead somewhere. And wrap it all the way down to the pheasant tail. Oops, trying not to move my pheasant tail around the shank. Move the thread back up. Then we're just going to wrap this around and create a body. So this being a pretty small rainbow ware, being a 20, I've opted for medium-sized tinsel. That's kind of my break-off point. Any 18 and larger, I use the large-sized tinsel. 20, 22, I'll go down to medium. And the reason for that is I like the tinsel to overlap each of the previous wraps. It seems to be a lot more durable for me that way. If I use pearl flashabou or crystal flash or the fine size of this and it doesn't overlap one time, for some reason it's not nearly as durable. I don't know about something about leaning those wraps side by side, and the first tooth of a fish that grabs hold of that, the whole thing comes loose. So I tied that all the way up. See, there I go again, doing things without telling you what I'm doing. I tied it all the way, wrapped it all the way to the bead, then I caught it with the thread and then wrapped backwards. I'm going to use the same tinsel as my wing case, so no need to cut it off and retie everything back on, right? And I'm just going to get a little bit of rainbow South Scud dubbing. I like the Wopsy stuff. You'll see me using this little guy here too. This is just a finger wet, just like for a cashier to help open up a bag, plastic bag. For me, it helps add dubbing and things. I have pretty dry skin, as you can probably see on the macro lens up there. I apologize for that, but it makes it so that my hands are a little bit gross on macro lenses, and it makes it really hard to dub. So I like to get a little bit of moisture on there. This won't take very much dubbing, just a tiny bit. Less is more on dubbing. All of you that tie regularly know how little dubbing you need. I'm amazed in the shop how often people come in and say they struggle with dubbing, and when I have them show me what they're doing, it's usually because they're grabbing this much dubbing and trying to stick it to the thread, right? And on macro, it makes it, people are learning from YouTube, it makes it look like you've got a lot of dubbing there, but you really don't. In particular, more coarse dubbings like ice dubbing, semi-seal, that kind of stuff, people really struggle with. But we need just a little bit of dubbing on here just to create a little thorax. I probably even have a little bit excess, but we'll make this work. Wrap it through to make a thorax. I'm going to try and get rid of that one guard here if I can. Maybe not. I'll have to trim it out of there. Then I'm just going to pull the wing case over the back. Capture it with the thread right behind the bead. Thank you. Wrap it backwards. Get out the trusty Tiemco midge whip finish. And give it a few turns, and we have a tiny little tailwater or wintertime rainbow warrior. Last step is to just trim the excess of that away. A very simple fly. Like I say, I certainly over the years, it's my best-selling fly combined. It might be, I'd have to go look at the numbers, but it might be overshadowed these days by Frenchies or thread Frenchies as far as sales more currently, but the Rainbow Warrior was, like I say, that was my very, very first commercially available pattern. The story on it goes, I was working at Fish Tech in Salt Lake at the time. And I don't know if you want to pass that, or if you want to look at that one, you sure can. Look at it up close. I was working at Fish Tech at the time. I was tying all of our custom flies for the shop. And so I was busy at the vise tying anytime I wasn't helping customers. And I was also, tying all my own flies, of course. And I don't actually have any recollection of exactly when I tied the fly. I wish I could tell you I had an epiphany of, this is what I needed to do. But I remember the Rainbow South Scud dubbing came out, and I saw the mixed colors, and I really liked that. I just want to make a fly that used that material. Anyway, I think I had 4 Rainbow Warriors in my box that I tied. I'm not sure if they were in there for 3 weeks or 3 months, but I tied them. I was on the Provo one day, having a slower than average day. I'd caught a few fish, but not nearly as many as I thought I should be catching. And I was seeing fish activity. I was seeing fish actively eating nymphs a lot more than what I was catching. And so I went through my regular, I tried sow bugs and little zebra midges and all my regular stuff that I'd been catching fish on. And I kind of got through my standard assortment of flies without changing my success very much. And at that point, one of my regular things to do is try a fly that I haven't fished very much. So I dug through my box and found what I now call a Rainbow Warrior and tied it on. And I went from like 6 or 8 fish to like 40 fish in the next few hours. I couldn't keep the fish off of it. And I came back to work the next day, and I worked for Mickey and Byron. If any of you have ever shopped at Anglers Inn or Fish Tech in Salt Lake, those fellows have worked in Salt Lake market for a long time. But I came back and told them of the success of the fly. I said, you want me to tie some for the bins? And they'd probably heard that story a 1,000 times, some kid coming in, telling them which fly that people should use on the Provo. But they were gracious enough to, Mickey just said, yeah, why don't you tie a couple dozen of them? We'll throw them in the bins and we'll see how it goes. So I tied a couple dozen Rainbow Warriors, threw them in the bin. I recommended them to the next few customers. And over the next few weeks, it kind of snowballed to where people that bought them kept coming back and buying more of them. Well, over the next several months, over that winter, I couldn't keep up. I tied 100. I kept a journal of all the flies because that's how they paid me. I'd write down how many I tied, how many I brought in, and I delivered them to one of the owners. They'd initial that I brought those flies in, and then about every month they'd pay me for the flies. So I had a record of exactly how many I tied. So I tied 133 dozen of them for the store in the first winter, and I wasn't able to keep up with the demand. So we went to Umpqua. We had the Umpqua rep back then. That was Van Rollo, and Van Rollo was in the shop, and he said, we approached him and said, we have a fly. We want to have a custom order done. And he said, well, pump the brakes. You got to have us tie a minimum of 10 dozen per size. And okay, that's good. He's like, really? I guess that was usually the most shops that wanted a custom fly wanted 4, 5, 6, 8 dozen for their season or something. So he thought that was going to shut us down. And we're like, yeah, that's good. That's no problem. He says, so you'll want more than 10 dozen? You're like, yeah. He goes, well, how many do you think you'd need? And I said, well, I've already tied 130 something dozen over the last few months. So I think 10 dozen is not going to be a deal breaker. And he said, well, if you're tying that many, it's really working well. I said, yeah, it's working great. He said, well, why don't we put it in the catalog? I didn't even know that was a thing. I'd never heard of it. I said, well, what does that mean? He said, well, we pay a royalty on flies that we put in a catalog, and when they sell, you become rich and famous, right? No, he didn't say. He didn't say that part, but they did add it to the catalog, and so that was my first fly, the old Rainbow Warrior. The next season, I sent them 24 other patterns, of which they accepted 0. So it wasn't all. I like to tease people. Are like, have you, how do I get a fly submitted, and how do I start making money off of royalty flies? And I said, well, you better have like a 40-year plan, because it's a long process, and even then it's not very lucrative. It's just more fun, right? And it's kind of cool to go in any fly shop, and not any fly shop, but most fly shops in the country. You can go find some of your own flies in them. That's kind of neat. It's a fun thing to see. And even more so than that, it's fun to hear other people having success on flies that you've created. It's kind of a cool thing. People are kind and reach out often on social media and say, hey, I like, your Rainbow Warrior caught me this giant fish, or your red dart worked in this particular place for, these steelhead or whatever. It's always fun to hear people's success stories with flies that you've created. Anyway, that's the Rainbow Warrior. Any questions on it? And yes.
Yeah, I guess like obviously it's river by river, but do you have a certain way that you like to fish the rainbow warrior?
I guess I fish it the most two ways these days. Originally, like I said, the original was tied with a glass bead because then I was mostly an indicator nympher. These days, I fish it as a dropper below dry the very most probably, and occasionally on a Euro nymph rig. So I tend to tie, most of mine actually tie nowadays on a jig hook and slotted tungsten bead to help get them down a little better. That way they fish well below a dry or on a Euro system. That's probably how I fish them the most. But I fished them from like, actually it's a pretty underrated chronomid pattern, I think, tied in larger sizes like 10s and 12s. In lakes, it'll fish really, really well. It's really deadly. I wish I could tell you what the fish think that it is. I don't know what they think that it is. Most of my flies, I think you'd find that way. They're all pretty dumb looking. That particular fly, I think, can be several things. When the thorax gets teased out, I think it can pass as a scud or maybe even a sow bug because the dubbing kind of encircles the rest of the body and it almost just has a little shine to it, but a little bit larger profile. When it's tied really neat and tight, like with the small thorax like that one I just demonstrated, I think maybe more of a midge pupa pattern. For me, it's worked really well about this time of year, February and early March, when some of the sack fries and elvins from brown trout spawn start to hatch from egg form. I think it looks a lot like a very small little minnow also, especially when you tie it on a straight shank like the jig. I've had some pretty voracious eats that way, and they'll also eat it swinging sometimes. So that suggests to me that they'll eat it as a small minnow. I wouldn't fish it probably in a 20 for that. I'd probably fish it more a 16 or 14, but lots of ways to fish it for sure. Good question. Any others?
What size seems to be the most productive for you?
16 or 18, I probably fish the very most. But again, some of that is based on how I fish it. We sell a lot of them in 20s and 22s and 18s too, but we sell less of the 14s and 12s, where I think people could use it in that size a lot more. But some of that's based on the Orem. I don't know how many we sell in this shop, but in our Orem store, being just down the road from the tailwater section of the Provo, people like small flies a lot, so we sell a lot of little ones. For me, I probably fish the most in 16s or 18s. Good stuff. Any others? Nada. All right. Well, then the question is, what should I tie in next? So I guess maybe to give you some ideas of things that I have to tie, I have stuff to tie: red darts, purple darts, blue darts, all more or less the same style of fly, just different colors. Black or olive poachers. I have stuff to tie: Frenchies, thread Frenchies. In fact, maybe I'll make an executive decision and just do, I have a couple new colors of thread Frenchies that we should probably do. Again, they're the same type of concept, but I'll tie both colors just for fun. And then after I do that, maybe be thinking of what else you want me to do. So regular Frenchies, I have stuff to tie: Tasmanian devils, bionic ants, cornfed caddis, chronomid Frenchies, bionic hoppers.
Survey?
I think we have stuff I could make surveyor work. Yeah. I don't have a bag for it, but it's just rainbow south scud dubbing, pheasant tail, and a little silver wire. I bet we have all that. I have stuff for iron lotus and silver bullet betas. And then I also brought some stuff to tie those Spanish dry flies. I want to do those before we're done, at least one of them. Maybe we could do a PMD or a green drake or something like that. It's more a style of tying. Again, you don't have to follow the pattern exactly, but we'll get it to where I'll show you how to, with that technique to use the CDC and things. So let's do some thread Frenchies, and then maybe we'll think about what else we should tie here in a minute. I'm going to start with a black version. So thread Frenchies came about for me when I was guiding. I've since stopped guiding, but when I was guiding, I needed some patterns that I was mostly guiding Euro nymphing style. I didn't do any advertising when I was guiding, so most people just found me on social media or came in the shop or emailed me, called me, whatever, or word of mouth. I stayed busier than I wanted to be, so I never really built a website or anything. Early on when I was guiding, I guess I guided for some smaller shops, but more recently, the last 15 years or so of my guiding, that wasn't the case. So because of my competition experience, most people would seek me out for Euro nymphing specifically. A few people would do other techniques, but that's what I had most people hire me for. And I tell you that so that I can give this fly a little bit of an intro, which is I was always catching lots of fish on the standard Frenchie that uses a pheasant tail body, but it's a little bit delicate. Pheasant tail is a magic material that we all love, right? But it's if it has a weak link, its durability, no matter what you do with it, it's just not as durable as some things. So I set out to try and find a way to make similar style Frenchies that were just a little bit more durable. So I thought the easiest thing to do there is just get rid of the pheasant tail. And the easiest way to make them outside of that was just to eliminate that and use thread. I've tied Frenchie style stuff with synthetic quills and dubbings and all kinds of other things, but I thought, what's faster than just wrapping over the top of the thread, right? So I've had thread Frenchies out in olive, in brown, and in black previously. The old black version, which is still available, used a different color hotspot than what I'm going to use on this one. But otherwise, it was fairly similar. It also used a different wire color. So the thread Frenchies ended up just being like a standard Frenchie. They have kind of the ice dub hotspot right behind the bead, but the thread Frenchie uses a thread and wire body instead of the pheasant tail body. And then I add a little bit of resin to them, usually just to make the thread and wire body even more durable. So if we do a black one first, I got this is just a Hannock 400 jig hook in the vise. Thank you. I have a 3mm slotted silver tungsten bead, and these you could tie in any weight you like. You could make this same hook would work with like a 3.5 or even a 4mm bead if you want to make them really heavy. You could put a 2.5mm bead if you want them light. That's great for fishing, below a dry. You can get them deeper, or you could, if you wanted to fish a smaller dry, you can make them lighter. And if you're on a Euro rig, you can tie them real heavy to make them your anchor fly, or you can keep them relatively light to fish as one of your dropper flies. So I've got just UTC 70 denier thread in black. We're going to use a little bit of Coq de Leon, which I thought that I got out, but apparently I didn't. For the tail, Coq de Leon is just a chicken feather that has some really unique speckling and a lot of natural sheen to it. Outside of that, it's not particularly magic other than, if you could use pheasant tail or something else, but it's also very durable. That's why I don't use pheasant tail on these. So I'm just going to pull a little bit of a few strands of that out to the side, pull it off of here, and then tie it in for a short tail. It doesn't take very much CDL, I'll call it for short, for Coq de Leon, to make a nice little tail. We'll get rid of that. Then the old style of this black thread Frenchie used sculpin olive wire. This one's got UTC, silver wire. It could be Semperfli. It doesn't matter what brand of silver wire you use, but just a silver wire. I do like this brassy size, or if you're getting the the Semperfli wire, you'll probably want the 0.2mm for this size anyway. If you were tying them much smaller, you could get away with small. I like to take this wire and just kind of insert it into the slot into the bead to kind of hold it on top of the shank, and then wrap it straight down the shank like so. And one hack here is if you don't tie that quite all the way to your tail, sometimes if you tie the wire all the way to the tail, your first wrap of wire will make your tail go to the side or flare out. If you go just barely shy of it, it won't do that. So then I'm going to move this thread. Oof, not like that. Actually, that's going to work okay because I need to change threads anyway. But normally we wouldn't do that. We would try not to let the sharp edge on the bead cut us off. But since I need to change threads anyway, we're going to use it to our advantage. Okay, so normally I would have just kept the black thread on for just a second longer, but this will work just fine. We're going to now wrap this through just like you would a zebra midge, just spreading out wraps. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Now I got to remember not to nick my thread on that same spot. Sometimes beads have a sharp edge on the back of them if they're not polished properly. See if I can helicopter this off. I tried to put lotion on my fingers so that they're only partially disgusting, and they're still pretty bad. Okay, next I'm going to put a little bit of resin on here. This is Solar as Bone Dry, a very well used one, so the taper on this brush is not as good as it used to be. I don't need a lot of it. I like just enough to barely seep on there and kind of coat I don't want to build it up like a perdigon. I'm really putting it on there to hold the wire in place so it doesn't slide around on the thread. I usually add a little bit of it, let it soak for just a second, and then just zap it with the light. And then normally at this point is when I would then whip finish the black thread and change to this. This is Danville 70 in Fluorescent Fire Orange. That's going to be a little hot spot. So on standard Frenchies, you might recall I used red thread for the hot spot behind the bead, the thread hot spot that is. And on the old style Frenchie of black, I used orange type of ice dub. This one is minnow body ice dub. It's kind of a pearl color. It doesn't take very much of this again. And with ice dubbing, just like I was saying on that South Scud, less is more for sure. I would rather see you put very little on rather than too much on. I'm just going to dub that onto the thread. I'm going to create a little thorax here. And I don't like to make them too bulky. I just want a little bit on there. Then I'm going to make a little bit of a thread band with this orangish fire orange thread and whip finish it. And we're all done. Ideally, we'd add some head cement, of course. When I tie, I always have these little foam cylinders around at my desk, and I tend to tie all the flies I'm tying per session, stick them in here. If I was tying a dozen of these, I'd stick them all in there. And then when I'm all done tying, I get my head cement and touch all of them all at once rather than one at a time. So I never put head cement on while I'm right here at the vise. You sure could. I'm just not in the habit of that. But that's the black thread Frenchie. That's the new version of it. It's very sleek. It's very sparse. It sinks really quickly. It's a fish catcher. That's this particular color combo. This and the purple both through the winter months work really well for me. I mean, imagine how hard could that be to believe that's going to catch a fish? It's basically a zebra midge with a hot spot, right? It's not revolutionary. It's not breakthrough. Take a look at that one. Just a little twist on some standard type materials, right? Okay, same thing. Let's do the same thing one more time, except we're just going to change to purple thread. And this one ends up being pretty dark because by the time you get resin on the purple thread, it's not quite black, but it's going to look pretty close to black. But since these only take a sec, we'll do one more. That way you can at least see both of them. I don't know if we just got these in our shop, or Madison go didn't. I wonder if they have them here already. They just became available. These two color combos just became available from Umpqua in the last week or so. All right, same thing. UTC 70. This time in purple. Back to the bend. A little bit of Coq de Leon. Doesn't take too much. Capture it with the thread, wrap it all the way to the bead so we don't have a tie-in bump. Need to get my bead to rotate. There we go. Same wire again, silver wire. If we capture it right there on top, wrap it down the shank. Again, I'm going to end just barely shy of the tail. I can see that last wrap started to move the tail, so I know that was too far. So now I'm just going to keep a little bit of tension there and then just coat the wire, just make it so the whole body is purple. See if I can keep without shearing off my thread this time. Then we'll do the wire. Any questions on this process so far? It's pretty straightforward, right? All of you have tied flies much more difficult than this. Capture it with the thread. Use your lotion-filled hands to helicopter off the wire. You could just cut the wire, but it leaves a little burr on there when you do that. And it ruins your scissors too. All right. Get rid of that. Then we're going to use our resin again. The wire job's not quite as pretty on this one as the last one, but it's going to do the trick. A little bit of resin, little time to soak, little time to bake. You can see it's fairly dark. When you compare it right next to the black version, you'll see that it is a little different, but it's not, they're both pretty dark. Same dubbing again. We don't need very much of it. A little bit of moisture to the fingers. Twisting dubbing always the same direction. Creating a relatively tight band. I don't like getting too carried away with that hot spot, but I really like the contrast of the silver bead to the really fire orange thread to the light color in the dubbing. Sometimes I go in and trim those off. I don't really know why, because as soon as you fish it, it gets fuzzy again, but let's see. We can, if anybody wants to, anybody want to look at that? It's the same as the other one, only purple. Anybody want to see it? Yeah? Okay. We'll pass it around then. That's the two new thread Frenchie colors. Any questions on those? Pretty easy, right? Pretty straightforward. Perfect. All right. Those went fast. What should I do next? Anybody do a poacher? You want to do an olive one or a black one?
Yeah.
Olive? Olive it is. We do. Even better. Olive poacher. So the olive poacher is a streamer that is incredibly versatile. It's one that I use on a Euro rig, jigging streamers. It's one that I use on a standard, sink tip or floating line, just stripping streamers. We use it on lakes, both retrieving with sinking lines, floating lines, midge tips, and we also hang it below indicators. Again, comes in two colors currently, in black and in olive. We're going to do the olive version. This fly, I never thought that there would be a day where we would sell the most popular fly we sell is a streamer. I don't know about this location, but I know as a company, at least our Orem store and our online, last year, this was our best-selling fly. We sold more of the olive poacher than any fly in the thousands of flies that we have. To me, that suggests that people like it and they've been catching fish on it. I know that it works really, really well for me. It has a squirrel tail, so it looks, some people will say it looks kind of like a slump buster is probably the closest thing that people are used to that's like it. This is a bit smaller than a slump buster, and it's quite a bit more dense than a slump buster because it's a little thinner, and it's got a much smaller hook also. Now let's see if I can get this open. Maybe not. I get the lotion off my fingers. The only thing I don't like about fire hole these days. And see if you can get it. See, look how easy that is.
I'm strong.
That's great. I'm glad that you are. Okay, so the olive poacher uses tungsten bead, and I also end up putting lead wire on there. So you don't have to put lead wire on, especially if you're fishing them below an indicator in a lake system. You won't need the extra weight. In a river, one of the things that I think makes this fly extra effective is that it is extra heavy. It's extra dense. So this is a 4.6 millimeter tungsten bead. And this, in the olive version, I like it in black nickel, which is what Madison just opened up for me. In the black version, I like silver because I like a little bit more contrast in the black version, but you could probably do the black version with black nickel also, and I'll bet it would work still. This fly, though, I end up fishing this fly a lot. Most of the winters, I don't love nymphing as much as I used to, so I've been fishing streamers a lot more. So whether I'm jigging streamers on a Euro rig or stripping streamers, this one is often on my rig. When I strip streamers, I tend to fish 2 of them at a time, and this is usually my second fly. I just got back from a couple weeks back from a trip to Chile and Patagonia, and this was our best fly there as well, both in the rivers and the lakes, just as a second fly behind something more sparkly, something like a sparkle minnow type pattern or a brighter colored bugger. So I can't say enough good things about this fly other than it just flat works. If you haven't fished one, I highly suggest it. So 4-6 bead, I ended up with a Hannock. Let's see, what did I put on here? A 10 maybe? I don't know where I put those. I think it's a 8 or a 10 size Hannock 400. Any jig hook in about 6, 8, 10, 12 even. I even tie some down to 14s once in a while for really micro streamers. Then I'm going to add some lead wire. This is 020. If you wanted them heavier, you could use 025 or 030 or even 035. I'm going to add just a little bit of lead wire. I'm going to try and push it into the back end of the bead. Then get rid of the excess of that. With lead wire, I do like to put a little bit of super glue on it to just keep it from rolling on the hook shank. I do the same thing whether I'm tying patch rubber legs or any other sort of pattern that I tend to put lead wire on. I tend to put just a little bit of super glue in there, let it kind of soak into the wire. I find that it makes a bit more durable fly. Then I'm going to take 140 denier olive thread. This is Danville. It doesn't really have to be. It could be UTC or it could be 6/0 Semperfly. Even 8/0 Semperfly would work just fine. I think that one's like 105 denier or something like that. Anything that's strong enough to kind of lash in a streamer, a smaller streamer anyway, material wise. I like to just coat the lead wire a bit with the thread back and forth, kind of hide that super glue in there. Then we're going to take a magic material, which is squirrel. These poor squirrels gave their lives so that we could catch some fish. That one might be thinner than I want. I saw one outside my hotel when I walked my car this morning. There was a squirrel running around. Looked like good poacher material. So this particular color is sculpin olive. You could tie them in just straight olive also. This is just the standard zonker strip. And I do like to leave these tails fairly long for a couple reasons. One is I like how well they swim when they're left long, and I also like that I can trim them if they're too long. I can't make them grow. So I usually make them longer than I think I need them to begin with. And then if it's too long while I'm fishing it, I can always use the nippers and give it a little quick cut. So I'm just going to tie that in. I'm going to tie it in with the squirrel's skin facing up. Because this is a jig hook, it's going to ride that way in the water, right? So I want the squirrel skin to be up, the fur, I should say, up, and the skin, the hide, in this case, facing up in the vise because of the way the jig style hooks tie. So I've just tied it in. One hack is to wrap that down the bend just a tiny bit past straight. I do that on purpose so it won't foul as much when you do that. If I stop tying that in about right here, the tail will foul more often. If you tie it down the shank just a little bit, somebody that's way smarter than me that understands how that works can maybe help me learn something, but I don't know why that works. It also works with marabou tails. If you just tie it down the shank a little bit, they look a little bit more dumb in your fly box because it looks like you tied them too far down the shank, right? But they fish better because they don't foul. So I always tie them down the shank just a little bit. Next up, I'm going to take just a Sharpie and put some black bars across the squirrel like that. This particular color I tie to kind of imitate sculpins, and sculpin have pretty a lot of modeling and dark barring to them. So I add a bit of that. Then I'm going to add a little bit of Ripple Ice Dub. This color is called Mother of Pearl, and it doesn't take very much of this. It's fairly coarse, just kind of a pinch. I'm going to tie it in to where half of, I'm going to kind of get it right in half of the majority of the fibers and then just fold it backward. That way it's locked in place, not going to slide out of there. Some of these sometimes end up being connected, and if they are, I'll give them a trim, but I don't want it to be too long. I don't want to overdo it with flash, so I'm going to trim some of those away. Any guys that are standing out really funny angles, I'm going to get rid of too. Just a little bit of flash. If you've ever seen a sculpin and you've looked at them up close, their bellies can often have a little bit of pearlescence to them. So I added that just to try and imitate that lighter colored belly. Okay, next up we're going to take the Stonfo. This is the Roto Dubbing Elite. Any dubbing twister you have will work. This just happens to be my favorite because it's got a couple features I really like. One, it has a ball bearing, so you just hold it and spin it to wind up your dubbing loop. Two, it has spring steel, so these guys are really flexible, and it will hold your loop open. So I'm just going to create a thread loop here that we're going to put some dubbing in. Close off that loop, wrap it back to where my pearl, mother of pearl ice dub is. Move the thread to the bead, throw a little half hitch in here. Then I'm going to get some Mega Semi Seal and Dirty Olive. Any olive color can work. This one happens to be my favorite color for sculpin. It's kind of got that brownish olive hue, and it's fairly spectrumized, so it's not all dyed one color. I like that because, again, the natural sculpins are quite mottled and very, very varied in color. So this dubbing tool, if I hold it up, maybe you can see it better. When I loosen it, it opens because these little arms want to open the Y, and when I pull it tight, it closes. So it's very, very handy. I'm just going to take little pinches of this, and because I can open it, slide them in, slide them to where I want it, then pull down and close. Now the material won't fall out. Push it up slightly, open it, put a pinch in, let it close. Same thing over and over. Slide that into place. Just pulling pinches out here. If you've ever looked at a sculpin, you'll note that they are much fatter on the head than they are at the tail. They're fairly kind of almost conical shaped. So I'm going to try and build some bulk with this. I might need one more pinch of that. I'm going to try and build a little bit of bulk with this without making it too bulky and harder to cast and tougher for it to sink. So I like dubbing for this purpose rather than using more squirrel or deer hair or anything like that, because I don't want quite that much bulk. So now I've got all that in place, I can just hold this tight and then just spin it up using the bearing. I like to spin it up pretty good. Then I'm going to hit it with some Velcro just to start loosening up some of those fibers. I'm not too worried about it yet because I'm going to still wrap it, but then we're going to wrap it through our body, and I want to try and make most of the bulk towards the bead. So I'm going to do less wraps in the back and start getting my wraps tighter and closer together towards the bead. And it's going to look like a big rat's nest for a second here, but that's okay. I'm going to pull nice and hard on that. Oh, somebody needs to adjust their vise. See if I can get that tight in before I fix that. Get in behind the bead. There we go. I'm going to throw some tension wraps in there to really hold it in place. Then I'm going to use this Velcro again and really hit it hard. I like to pull it, all the material, more or less to the sides and straight up. And don't be afraid to just murder this thing with the Velcro. I'm pulling it all up for a reason I'll show you here in a second. Again, the sculpins have really, really broad heads, and then they get much thinner towards the back. So what we're going to do now is pull those fibers up. I'm going to try and separate some of my flash so I don't cut all my flash out of there. But now I'm going to cut it at an angle. And what that's going to do, I'm going to pull those up and cut down like this, and it's going to leave more bulk at the head and less towards the tail. So now I can tease this back out to however you want, or you can just leave it for that matter. It's going to end up this way as you fish it. But I usually go back through them like this and tease it back out to the sides, almost like you're making, if you've ever made a crab, like for permit or something like that, you've used some synthetic materials and teased them out on the side to make that type of profile. We're doing the same thing here. So now we've got a wider profile towards the head and a more narrow tapering body going towards the tail. Okay, our last couple of steps here. Last one is to add a hackle. This is a Brahma, whiting Brahma. This particular color they call golden olive. This is my absolute favorite, but there's also some that are just olive, dark olive. There's they make them in March brown. There's a whole bunch of other colors that are quite neat and pretty in this particular one. These have a lot of speckling to them. It's just a soft hackle. It's basically a hen. It's a really cool color though. They've been hard to get for a little while, but we've just got them back in stock recently. There are some substitutes as well. An olive India henback would work well. There's some Coq de Leon products from whiting that also work well for this. But what I'm going to do with this, the next kind of distinguishing feature that I notice anyway when I look at a sculpin is their pectoral fins. Their pectoral fins are really big. And so they have a large head, but they have these giant pectoral fins that stick out on the side. So this is going to kind of do double duty. It's going to look a bit like silhouette-wise. Keep in mind, we're stripping this and moving it most of the time, jigging it, swimming it. So they're not staring at it like they would a midge, but we're going to create a bit of a silhouette that looks a bit like the sculpin's pectoral fins and also building a little bit of bulk in the head. So I've just taken the feather and grabbed the tip of it and then stroke the fibers downward. Then I'm going to trim the tip away to where I just have a little tiny tie-in point that I can add anywhere you like on the hook. Grab it with some tension. Then I'm just going to wrap this hackle around, I'd say a minimum of a couple turns. I usually try and squeeze 3 turns in there if the feather's long enough. This one we're going to get 2.5 anyway. Probably get 2 about there. Capture it with the thread. I'm not too worried about what's going on with the fibers because I'm going to use the thread to kind of push them all backwards anyway. Like so. So I'm just going to corral them with the thread, tie over those stems. Next, I'm going to pull up the fibers that are on the bottom, and I'm just going to trim them away. So trimming them straight off. Then you'll notice the excess from my dubbing loop I set on the table here. I end up using that just to clean this off, finish this fly off, and put a little bit of dubbing to hide some of that thread. So rather than throwing that away, I just use the trimmings for that. It doesn't take very much, just enough to get around the thread a couple of times. Oops. I'm going to wrap it through. And then the last step, of course, is to whip finish. And again, I would always add head cement to them once you're done. Super glue, something like that to make them more durable. But that's it. So I trimmed that away so that if you look at it from the underbelly, you'll see these kind of stand out. And when you get it wet, the dubbing will lay back a little bit more and the hackle will keep a little bit more rigidity. So it has that kind of sculpin, big pectoral fin profile. It also adds a little bit of bulk to the head. And because it's soft, it'll also pulse and move. It's a cool fly. Again, you can even fish it below an indicator on a lake because of all of the moving parts. You've got squirrel tail, you've got soft hackle, you have dubbing part in there that are, everything's able to move and pulse. So it's even below an indicator with just a light wave, the fly is swimming, it's moving all the time. That's what I call the olive poacher. There's a black version of it that's more or less the same, except we don't do the barring on it because black doesn't show up well on black. I use black everything else, some black flash, black body, black hackle, silver bead. That's the olive poacher though. That color combo is the best one sales wise. This is the one I fish the very most too. I do always have a few black versions in my box, but I tend to fish the olive one a lot more than the black version. Any questions on the poacher? Yeah.
So is there an advantage to doing both a bead and or tungsten lead wire opposed to just a larger tungsten bead?
No, you could just do a larger tungsten bead. Tungsten bead in a bigger size is actually quite a bit heavier than just adding lead wire. Lead's pretty dense, but not as dense as tungsten. So bigger tungsten bead, if you wanted it heavier, it would help. One thing that putting lead wire on it does is it does help balance the fly a little bit more. It's not balanced perfectly, but it will make it so that some of the weight is further back in the shank. So it will fish a little bit different than if you just put a super heavy bead on the front. It would be super nose heavy and want to nose dive instead of plain out just a little bit. But we're splitting hairs at some point there. If you wanted to make it heavier, yeah, oversized beads for sure. Good question. What else? Pretty straightforward. It's like I say, if you haven't fished that one, I highly suggest it. It's my number one fly on a streamer rig. I talked about it a second ago, but I like to fish from a boat, especially, even wading a lot of times, but from a boat, I like to fish 2 streamers, usually something that's brighter, white, gold, a ginger bugger, a sparkle minnow, something that I can see. And then I'll trail something more drab, whether it's olive or black or something like that behind it. And I find that combo works really, really well. And it makes a difference to have 2 flies on there rather than just one. I fish the top fly usually about 3 or 4 feet. I don't like them any closer than 3 feet. Most time 4 feet, I would say, and sometimes even 5 feet behind. It's not very good to keep them too close together. You want to have them separated. I like to fish the top fly on a tag off the main line. I don't like tying 2 streamers with one tied to the bend of the hook. If you do tie to the bend of the hook, that first streamer doesn't swim very well. You have tippet tied to both sides. So unless the fish totally T-bone it, they have a harder time getting it, the fly, because they run into your tippet. But more so than that, having one tie-in point just allows that fly to swim better. But having 2 flies on there, it's amazing how often, let's say you're fishing a sparkle minnow in front of a poacher, how often the sparkle minnow is getting 1 out of every 10 fish. And so my natural inclination is to take the sparkle minnow off and try something else, right? And then usually what happens is my catch rate goes down. And I think it's usually, whether it's a sparkle minnow or a white, streamer of some sort, but there's something about having something brighter that I can see and that the fish can see, I think easily, that attracts them to it, that they come and swim and check out. This is never more prevalent for me never more obvious than when I fish the green in Utah, where it's crystal clear water all the time, and you can track your flies from the second they hit the water all the way back to the boat, and you can see everything. I know you can see, hey, Scotty, I know you can see lots of rivers around. You can see your streamers a lot of the time, but the Green River is particularly clear, and it's amazing how often fish will follow stuff and not eat. In our shop, I often tease when customers come in and they're headed to the green, they ask us what streamers are working, and I start showing them the streamers I do the best on, and they're all small. And everybody wants to throw giant articulated, streamers. And they'll say, you wouldn't throw something articulated? And I'll say, I wouldn't tell you not to, but if you're asking me what I would do, no, I wouldn't throw something articulated, not there at least. And they'll say, well, why not? I said, because I like catching fish, not just watching fish follow my fly. They just escort those flies all the time. They'll eat them once in a while, but fishing 2 flies makes a big difference. And if you have that top fly on there that attracts them in, if you're catching lots of fish on the back fly, you might tinker with changing that top fly, but keep in mind, if your catch rate goes down, put that other fly on, even though it wasn't working very well. Even though the fish weren't eating it, it can be drawing them into your rig and can make a big difference. That Green River, like I say, it makes it a big difference being able to see how the fish react to everything. Then I like that lighter fly too. It lets me know how close to the bottom my flies are, whether I'm around a rock or a log, whether I need to speed up to keep them off the bottom or accelerate to get around, a snag of some sort. Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, it allows me to know when to stall them. I can move them in front of a rock or get right to a drop off and then stop them and let them fall. And if you can see the flies, man, you can fish them a lot better. You just, instead of just stripping and hoping, you're very deliberate about where you're putting them.
Are you fishing that bow streamer same size, or is your dropper a little small?
Usually the dropper's a little smaller, but they could be the same size. Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of that would depend on the river and what's going on, but I would tend to fish the dropper. The dropper I would call the top fly, right? The point fly would be a little bit smaller, and the top fly would be a little bit bigger if they were different sizes, generally speaking. I don't put any stock. I've heard people say you got to have the big fly in the back and the small fly in the front because it looks unnatural to have a small minnow, let's say, chasing a bigger minnow. And you're like, yeah, but the fish don't reason. They're not, they don't know these things. Trust me. Those are the kinds of things that we put on our fly rigs that we think about too much. The fish aren't that smart. Don't worry about that. Good question. Any others on the poacher or on streamer rigs in general? Good stuff. Do we want to do a black one, or are we comfortable? Yeah, do a black one. Let's do the black version. Maybe the black one has beads that I can open. All right, the black version, I do have to, we have to make a choice because I do some of them with either of these dubbing colors for the flash. Commercially, they are done with this peacock bronze. So maybe we'll do that one. But I do tie some of my own with this Northern Lights color. They're both dark, both flashy. I'm not sure that it honestly makes that big of a difference. But they're both kind of cool colors. If you haven't messed with Ripple Ice Dub, you should. It's pretty cool stuff. It's much more coarse than standard ice dubbing, so you won't want it for like hot spots and things. But I've been doing a lot of like gold or silver buggers where you can buy the gold or silver Ripple Ice Dub and just dub the body instead of a chenille body on a bugger. This hook, it was the Hannock 400. This was an 8 I had. I said 10 before. It's an 8. 10s work great too, though. Oops. Down it goes. And actually, now I don't know. Did I pull it out of that package or this other one? Doesn't matter. Could be an 8 or a 10. Semi-seal we need. We can probably just use that. Okay. Same process. We're going to use a jig hook again. We're going to put, this is a 4.6. You could tie them lighter. Sometimes for river fishing, I'll tie them where if it's my second fly and I'm stripping them, I'll tie them with more of a 4 mil bead instead of the 4.6 or 4.5, depending on the brand of bead you buy. Because sometimes I don't want them super heavy. If you're jigging them on a Euro rig, then you'll definitely want them at minimum 4 millimeter, possibly bigger, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6.4, depending on how deep and fast the water is that you're fishing. This bobbin requires a different bobbin threader that I know I have in here somewhere. But it might be easier just to put it on this one. Most of you, I imagine, like fishing streamers. Yes. Who doesn't, right? There's a few people that don't. There's a few dry fly only people out there, but streamers are one of my favorite ways to fish. All right. Same process, black thread this time, silver bead instead of black nickel. There again, you get to tie your own flies. You get to decide whether you want, a silver bead, a black nickel bead, a jet black bead, a chartreuse bead, an orange bead. The world is your oyster, right? When you're tying them yourself, you get to make all those decisions. I put O2O on there. Lead wire wise, again, just a little bit of super glue to soak in. I like to start the thread right behind the lead wire so that I'm pulling thread towards the bead, pushing the wire towards the bead with some tension here to make it so that the very first wrap or two is doing nothing but pushing that lead back into that bead head.
You have a question on the chat.
Oh, yes, a chat question.
Yes. Do you use an indicator for strike detection on a drift or drop while fishing 2 streamers?
I do not use a strike indicator. You could, but I tend to, when I'm fishing 2 streamers, I'm usually just stripping them in. On a Euro rig, I just use 1 streamer. That's a good question, though. I like it. But you sure could if you fish in an area where like, I have caught a lot of fish on that olive poacher where there's a lot of crayfish, and you can use it below an indicator for that. And sometimes throwing mends and animating the fly as it's drifting can be very effective. So there's definitely times where that would be advantageous. I don't do that very much myself, but I know lots of people do. Okay, same process here. We're just going to take our squirrel. I'm going to use this little piece that I had here. This is just a zonked piece of squirrel. And I'm going to tie it hide up again. I usually just butt it up against that lead wire. I'm going to tie it down the bend farther than you'd think on purpose. No need to bar this one unless you wanted to try and put silver or gold Sharpie bars, but black's not going to show up on there. Then we're going to take this Ripple Ice Dub, and same thing, we're just going to pull a few strands. Doesn't take very much. Little goes a long way. A few strands like that. I'm going to tie them in about midway halfway between the flash length, fold it over, tie it in place, pull my scissors through a couple of those that are looped, it looks like. Is there one more in there? Nope. I'm going to just trim any of the extra long ones, adding a little bit of flash to it. Then we're back to our dubbing material here and our dubbing loop. This time I'm just going to use some black semi-seal. You could use black magic, UV black. This one's black UV. I don't think that it really makes any difference in this particular fly. Just dark silhouette. Same thing though. I'm going to use my dubbing twister. Take just kind of a pinch at a time. I don't want this to be too bulky, especially towards the back. So I'm going to try and get more sparse here and then build more bulk towards the bottom end of the loop. You can do this with other dubbing spinners. This one just makes it easier. This is one of those buy once, cry once. This is not a cheap tool, but it's one of my favorites.
Don't tell it too much because we're out of them.
Are we out? Do we have the, they make another one that's the black handled one that has the same wide. We have that one? Maybe. There's another one that's less expensive that just doesn't have the stainless steel handle. The top half of it's more or less the same, except it has I think it's a less expensive for them to make bearing system, but it's quite a bit less. We should have that one too. If not, we have them online most of the time. You can order them. Or if should you find yourself in Orem or want to make a road trip, we usually keep them there too. All right, teasing that out. Then we are going to wrap up the body. Looks like I've got more dubbing than I need on that one, which is okay. I'm going to capture it with the thread. Get rid of it. I'm going to pull some of that out maybe, just to keep it for to finish the fly. Then we'll add some extra wraps just for extra security there. I'm going to do the same thing and tease this one out a bit. I'm not quite as worried about making this one sculpin shaped because I've never seen a black sculpin. In fact, if you wanted to make this more leechy, you could just tease this out and trim it shorter, or you can, instead of the mega semi-seal, you could just use regular semi-seals, a little bit shorter. But I still usually tie them the same just because it's a habit. Same process, and then we're going to take a black hen saddle like this. Pluck one of the feathers. I like to pull off all the fluffy stuff at the bottom. I'm just going to grab the tip again and stroke the fibers down. Trim the top out of it so I have just a little tie-in point. Capture it with the thread. Then I'll rotate that around and through. It's spinning a bit on me, but that's okay. I'm just going to force all the fibers backward anyway. Trim that out of there. I'm going to do the same thing we did on the last, where I like to cut it flat. On this one, again, it probably doesn't matter, but since I've done that way from the beginning, I always stick with it because it just works for me. No reason to change. Then I'm going to use some of this excess dubbing that I had to clean up the head just a little bit. And we have a black poacher. This one I do fish in lakes more than I fish it in rivers, where the olive one I'll fish both pretty religiously. But this does have its day on the river. I think we've probably all experienced, anybody that's fished streamers a fair bit has experienced the days where you're fishing something olive or something black and you switch to another color and suddenly that makes all the difference. There are days where having something black on there does make all the difference.
Do you You fish for carp. Have you used it for carp at all?
I have used it for carp. That's a great question. Yes, I would tie them lighter than this for carp, but yes, I love fishing for carp. Yeah, I would probably add on the olive one. I would probably add some rubber legs just to make it a little bit more crayfishy, if that makes sense. But the black one for just a little leech, yeah, definitely. Yeah, the carp love it.
Why would you tie it lighter?
Lighter because carp, where I catch them anyway, are usually in shallower water, and they're really sensitive to flies hitting the water hard near them. So this one, with that one in a 4-6 bead, it will really smack the water. I would probably fish it in like a 3.5 or maybe a 4 mil bead for carp most of the time, because I don't need it to get down but 2 or 3 feet most of the time. And yeah, just it's mostly about entry to the water. They are not very tolerant of poor presentations, and a real heavy fly makes for a really difficult carp presentation. Good question though. I like it. Are you a carper yourself?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I see that on your hat now. My man, I like the carp. Yeah, they are so much fun. Very underrated fish in my opinion. They have their haters as far as their looks go. But man, if you start fishing for carp, they get a lot of respect from most people that fish for them for a little bit, because they're not very easy to catch.
No, they're harder than trout. I think.
Way harder. Yeah, a long time ago, I read a book where they said that they had estimated IQs of fish, and the smartest trout was a brown trout, and I think it was an estimated IQ of 8, and a carp was 12, they said. They're definitely smarter. They are very adaptable. They're also invasive and can cause problems, right? But man, they are strong fish. They're one of the only fish in freshwater that will consistently take you into your backing. They're a fun fish. And when the rivers are too warm, lakes are too warm, the carp fishing's really good at that point.
What about relative fly size for the 2-fly streamer rig?
Relative fly size? Well, I don't think there's a real there's no limit there. It's more a limit of your casting ability and the rod weight you're using, the line weight you're using. The heavier the line weight you're using, the more grain weight you have to carry bigger streamers. So, I mean, I've thrown like 2 fly rigs for pike. I've thrown 2 fly rigs for lake trout, where you can throw a couple of really big flies, but then I'm using a 9 weight, an 8 weight, a 10 weight. For trout fishing, I mean, I guess I often throw them in like 2s, 4s on the big end of things, and then a lot more 6s, 8s, and sometimes even 10s is my trailing fly. But again, that varies depending on where you are and what the fish like. I think streamers, I guess my opinion on streamers recently is that they are, I think we tend to fish them too big most of the time. We've gone from nobody fishing streamers to a few people fishing streamers in my lifetime anyway of being in the industry. Hardly anybody fish streamers to a few people fish streamers that are average size to everybody only fishing giant streamers. And then now I'm starting to see people actually start to retract back to more moderate size streamers. We don't sell as many of the truly big streamers as we used to. I'm even hearing like I've listened to some of the Kelly Gallup podcasts. They're always entertaining. I like listening to those guys. And I've even heard them say they're sometimes going back to slightly smaller. If you've seen a lot of his newer flies come out, they've been smaller micro dungeons and mini dungeons. And I think there's a trend going back to slightly smaller streamers. There's always going to be a place for big streamers, of course, but I think effectiveness wise, there's a happy medium in there. And some of that boils down to the forage that the fish are eating. I mean, if everything the fish are eating is this big, 1/2 inch, and we're fishing 5-inch streamers, on the Provo River, we don't catch a lot of fish on the Provo River with big articulated flies. And to me, I think that's the only real forage in there are sculpin, small trout, sculpin, and there are some leeches in there, some black leeches. But they're, most of the sculpins are, you could find a sculpin that's 5 or 6 inches long, but most of them are like 2 to 3 inches long. If that's most of the forage. And there are piles of them. Every time I do an electrofishing survey, we will shock thousands and thousands of sculpin in like a 300-yard stretch. And for every one sculpin we catch in a net, we probably miss 10. I mean, they're small, right? So they are they're lousy in the Provo, and that's not unique to that system. There's a lot of sculp in most of our freshwater fisheries around. Yeah, so small streamers. I don't know. I often fish. If I was going to the Green or the South Fork, I'd probably fish like a 4 or maybe a 2, but I'd probably have my top fly most time being a 4, and then I'd probably fish like an 8 or maybe even a 10 as my trailer would be a good starting point. Same thing for me in Chile. I was doing the same. I was fishing like as big as 2s, but 2s, 4s, even 6s, and then trailing a 8 or a 10. That seemed to work best. Good question. What else? Any others? No? Okay. What should we tie next? We haven't done. I was going to say, we haven't done any dry flies. We got to do dry flies. What time is it? Been an hour in. Yeah, well, let's do some CDC patterns. We can do Spanish dries, and we can, if we have some time, we can do a corn-fed caddis too. Thank you. So Spanish dries are interesting because they are relatively simple, and they don't require they're not particularly hard, I guess. I don't think to tie. They take a little bit of practice to understand what you're doing with them, but other than that, not too much to them. I'm trying to see what I have in here so I can figure out what to tie. Let me do that. 1 in a second. 14, huh? That's a pretty small green drake. What else do I have? Ooh, I have some bigger hooks in this one. Let's do a green drake. Maybe a 10. That's better green drake size. So this hook, this could be any dry fly, your favorite dry fly hook. This happens to be one of mine. I like 2 dry fly hooks a lot. One is the Tiemco 100 and one is this Gamakatsu S10. Those are my 2 favorite dry fly hooks. They're both really strong wire-wise, but light enough to keep your fly floating. I really like the upswept point on this particular hook too. So these Spanish style flies I was introduced to by, watch this. I'm a pro. I was introduced to from my friend Pablo in Spain, who is a fellow competitor. I think he's probably the best fly fisherman I've ever been around that has not medaled individually in the World Championships. I would argue that he's good enough to have won the World Championship several times. I was in the class, the Euro Nymphing class I did last night. If those of you are here for that too, this will be repetitive. But I told them that I like to think I can kind of hang with him when it comes to nymphing. I think I can hang with him when it comes to streamer fishing. I honestly think I'm a little bit better than him. I think my results show that on lakes. But where I'm not better than him 100% is dry fly fishing. And I fancy myself a decent dry fly fisher. I'm obviously still learning, but I mean, if I've won the Green River single fly with dry flies 3 times, catching 43 fish twice and 22 fish once. 19 fish once on 1 dry fly, that you get 1 dry fly all day. And like the first time I won it with 43, the next closest guy had 22 that day, and he was fishing streamers. The next time I won it with 43, I think the next closest person had like 15 or something like that. I feel like I'm a decent dry fly fisher. That said, I have a lot to get better at. I can guarantee you, because I've watched my friend Pablo do it, and he makes me look like I'm an absolute rookie. He introduced me to super long leader dry fly techniques, which I was used to fishing 10, 12, even 14 foot leaders. I was not used to fishing 18, 20, 22 foot leaders. And especially with the design that he uses, where they're all hand tied and it's not like 18 feet of butt section and a little tippet. It's like 6, 7, 8 feet of tippet. And the reason for that is that he's a master at not getting it to turn over. You don't really want your dry fly leader to turn over perfectly straight, right? We oftentimes as fly fishers, I think, envision the perfect cast as one that lays out nice and straight and looks beautiful. And while that looks neat on camera, when you try and fish it, what happens to your dry fly cast if it lays straight the second it hits the water?
Drag.
We get drag immediately. So instead, we're trying to introduce slack, right? So this long leader system allows you to fish hooks and curves and pile type casts with a whole bunch of tippet, but it takes some getting used to handling a leader that long, casting it, number one. When I have some of my friends that try it, the first thing they do is pick it up. They'll say, "Can I try your rod?" And you go, "Yeah, sure." And they pick it up and they can't even get and I had the same problem, trust me. I picked up my friend Pablo's. I'm like, let me see that. He's making it look so easy. Let me look at that. I try it, and I'm trying to get it to kick over and try and have control and command of it. And that's not really what you're trying to do. Everybody struggles with it when it's that long and you have that much tippet. But what you do is you end up throwing casts that end up hooking and, like I say, piling to where you're getting little sections of drag-free drift. And when you get really good at it, which he is, I'm teetering on being mediocre at it, I think. You also have a lot of command of it as far as accuracy goes, which that's been the hardest thing for me is on smaller water where you're trying to cast around overhanging bushes and putting casts super tight to banks where there's overhangs and things. But I mean, how often have you been fishing in a river where you have just a little, current's going this way and that wall's a bank and this wall's a bank and there's a fast water here, but the current's going here and there's just a slow layer of water right near a bank where there's a fish sipping, right? And it used to be that I'd go upstream and fish down and across to that fish, throw a big reach cast out there and feed a little slack, and you get some of those fish. And I still do that sometimes, but there's ways to fish from down or straight across stream where you just build a whole bunch of slack into the cast where the fly gets in there and just drifts for 4 or 5 feet drag free with those super long leaders. And the other thing that is necessary for those super long leaders is a fly that's not very wind resistant. So if you tie a big bushy dry fly on, it's harder to cast with a leader that long, and it's harder to control with that long tippet. So there's a couple of things that have to play together here, have to play nice. This style of dry fly, though, is one that he showed me. He showed me how to use the CDC in this method and so on. It can be used for about any mayfly and really even any caddis if you'd like. You change the way that the wing sits a bit based on whether it's more of a caddis or more of a mayfly. But what I'm going to show you here is more of a mayfly style. So you could tie these, think of, change your body color, your thread color, and maybe your CDC color a little bit, but mostly just the body color and the size of the hook. And you can do bluing olives, you can do tricos, you could do PMDs, you could do sulfurs, you could do mahoganies, March browns, green drakes, gray drakes, and on and on and on, right? It's just kind of a platform, a style of fly. All right, I've talked about it enough. Let's just build one.
Going back to your leader.
Yeah.
How about indicators, small yarn indicators? How much does that affect the casting?
Oh, on that long leader, it affected a lot. It's very difficult to cast anything other than a single fly on there. If you can sometimes get a dry and a dropper if your dry is like maybe a 12, 14 CDC pattern that travels through the air pretty well, but an indicator would be pretty tough.
Indicator to keep track of my fly.
Keep track of a smaller fly. Yeah, you might try putting maybe if you put it further up on the leader, into the butt section of the leader a bit more, it might carry it better. I haven't played with it there a lot. I know trying to throw 2 dries on it is very difficult. I don't often like to throw 2 dries because I find they just tow each other around most of the time anyway, and neither one gets a good drift. But in some big river situations where you're fishing a big seam or something that's wide enough to have 2 flies, it can work pretty well. But on a lot of water I fish, the seams are really small and 2 flies doesn't work very well. The same would be true for an indicator if it's too far away, but it's a trade-off, right? It's a balance to be struck. If you can't see your fly, it's hard to fish it that way too, right? So I haven't messed with it that high up. I'd try it, but I would try putting it as far away from the fly, the terminal fly, as you think you dare, just to try and put it on more of the meat of the leader to help turn it over, if that makes sense. All right, let's tie one of these. So I do like to use nano silk for this particular style fly because I'm going to crank down a bunch of CDC at the end of it, and I don't want to build up too much bulk. I don't think it matters whether it's the 50 or the 30, or you could even really tie it with like 100 denier if you wanted. If you're tying a drake that's this size, if you're tying a smaller fly, I wouldn't go quite to the 100 size, but thank you. I'm not a pro anymore. Any thread that's relatively strong that doesn't build up a lot of bulk will work just fine. For this one, I'm going to use a little bit of Coq de Leon for the tail. I happen to have that handy. You could also do some Zelon, Antron if you want a trailing shuck style fly, but the traditional style would be using, this Coq de Leon, which is kind of fun because my friend Pablo lives in Leon in Spain, where Coq de Leon comes from. That's where this particular feather is from, right from Spain. Cool stuff. The whatever the breed of chicken is that's evolved in that area, I don't know if it's something they eat or what, but they just naturally create that barring and that sheen. That's what they call them, Coq de Leon, because they're from Leon, Spain. All right, I tied in a few of the fibers for a tail. Let's see, in a drake, we probably want to do something like this. You could use, this is flex floss. You could use just regular yellow floss if you wanted. You could even use wire if you want on a drake. I don't often like to put wire on my dry flies if I don't have to, with a few exceptions. But I do like to use this stuff for green drakes. You can tie that in and stretch it as you wrap it back so it doesn't build up very much bulk. And all we're going to do is basically create a pretty standard style body. This is actually going to work good too for my body here. We'll take some, this is dark olive squirrel, which isn't normally a dry fly dubbing, but it is actually what I tie most of my drakes with. You could use whatever your favorite drake dubbing is, whether that's a trout hunter dubbing, whether that's super fine, whatever works for you would work just fine. Drakes tend to be pretty big and bulky. I often use this mostly because I really like this color. So this, again, this is just SLF squirrel from Wapsie and dark olive. So I'm just going to dub a body here, see if I can keep this on the thread. The one disadvantage to the nano silk is it's so slippery, it doesn't always hold the dubbing as well as I'd like. I could quit being lazy and put a little dubbing wax. I have some of that around here somewhere, but it usually works without, so I'm going to go without. All right. We're just going to create a body here. This is pretty standard for any dubbed mayfly you've ever seen. Maybe a couple more twists to tighten that up. Then I'm going to use this and stretch this quite a bit because I don't want it to be too thick. But those drakes often have a little bit lighter barring to them, a little segmentation. So I'm going to use that floss for that purpose. Tie over it, get rid of the excess. Then if all of these stragglers bother you, you can always come in and give them a snip. I'm not too concerned with them, especially on a fly like this. I kind of actually like them because it capturing the surface film a little more with a few more of those outriggers sticking out from those spiky guard hairs. Okay, this is where it changes things a little bit. So normally at this point, we would have already put on a wing in the case of parachute or upright divided wing, something like that. In this case, I'm going to add some glow bright, which could be any color you like. And I'm going to add some poly, which could also be any color you like. So if you want to make this really imitative as far as true to the natural color of the dun itself, then I would have kind of a dun colored wing. Since I'm not usually too concerned about that, I usually use white because I can see it better. And I took 2 colors of glow bright. This is number 12 and number 5. Any colors you like would work just fine. But what I'm going to do is create a little bit of a wing that's going to go through the center of our CDC. So I don't need a lot of this, just a bit. This is EP trigger point, just basically a fine poly. And all I'm going to do is tie these in together. I left them long on purpose so that I can pull them through the CDC at the end. So what we're going to do is just tie those on top of the shank here. Pull them backward. I'm going to actually even tie into my dubbing just a little bit to make sure they're really back. I do want to make sure they stay on top of the hook shank. Then I'm going to take a little bit more dubbing, and I'm going to make a little dubbing ball here. This is fairly crucial to this style of wing to make it stand up properly. If you don't create a little bit of a thorax, a little ball of dubbing here, the CDC, when we push it up against it, isn't going to stand upright. It will lay back too much. So I don't want it to lay back for the mayfly on the caddis. Not as important, because then we can just let it lay back. Not a big deal. But for this, I really want it to push upward. So I'm going to make a pretty big ball of dubbing. I sometimes even wrap some on this side of my wing. Go in there one more time. Basically just creating a thorax, but also a really nice bump of dubbing right there. Make sense? Okay, now this is where we get to a little bit different stuff here. Any dun colored, kind of dun or natural dun colored CDC works. I do really like these Swiss CDC options because they're really large feathers usually, to where you can get long enough fibers for a fly of this size. If we're tying smaller flies, it wouldn't be as important, but to leave enough of this to have some wing, I'm going to try not to use the stems. So what I'm going to do is come in and about where I think the fibers get long enough to be usable, somewhere in that neighborhood, I'm just going to trim the tip away like that. I'm going to come down and create some V's in this CDC. So I'm going to trim right there, which made this little guy with a kind of a V in it. That leaves this here, which I'm going to also trim in half, just cutting the stem. So now I have two more of those, and I'm going to find another feather and do that another time. Let's find another bigger one. That one looks good. So starting from this, pulling fibers down to where they get long enough to be usable for this size of fly, getting rid of the tip, and then same thing again. Cutting a little V, cutting a little V. And the more CDC you add to these, the more buoyant the fly will be, the harder it is to cast because it adds bulk. The less CDC you use, obviously, the more sparse the fly is going to be. The next step is to take all of these fibers and try and line the tips up, or sorry, the stems up. So what I'm doing, I'm trying to put the lighter colored stuff on top, lost one, and the darker colored stuff on the bottom, like so. I'm going to try and keep all those stems as close together as I can, and I'm going to push to where all the stems kind of terminate at the same place. So I've just got a really nice V that's full of CDC. So I'm going to try not to tie in any stems here at all. Then I'm going to pull all the fibers up like this, and I'm going to try and tie it in right where my stems stop. So I'm going to do kind of a pinch wrap right there. And this is where this really strong thread comes in, because I really need to bind that down with a lot of pressure to keep all that CDC on top and not let it flare around to the other side. Then I'm going to wrap some in front to really lock that in place. A couple more wraps here. I like to leave this for the time being. I'm going to trim that in a second. But now what we're going to do is kind of make sure our CDC is all out of here. I'm going to push it down a little with my thumb. Then I'm going to start separating it. I'm just going to kind of split it in half. Doesn't have to be perfect, but relatively speaking, we're going to split it. And I left these long enough so that I could pull them through the CDC like this and over the top, and then it splits. So right now, this side is a little more sparse than that side. So I'm going to go back here and pull a few extra fibers to that other side. Not too many, I hope. Let's give that another look. Yeah, it's still a little bit sparse on that side. Somewhere in there looks pretty close. It doesn't have to be exact. Then I'm going to try and pull those fibers back, leaving the butts in place. I'm going to tie over all of the poly to just hold it in place. And then I'm going to fold it back and tie back over it to force it backward. Once I've got that, I can move my thread back to the eye, and hopefully I left just enough room, which I did in this case, to whip finish. I'm going to get rid of the thread. I'm going to trim these butts. I usually leave them a little bit sticking out. You could trim them all the way off. I've even seen people use a cautery tool and burn them completely off if you're really worried about the look of the front of that. I'm not too concerned with it. Then I'm going to come up and try not to cut any of my CDC, at least as little as possible, and trim this about maybe half to 3/4 length of the CDC so that it's maybe pulling that one too hard and I moved my thread. Shouldn't have done that. But anyway, normally that lays back a little bit. But the key here is we have a big enough bump that forces the wing up, this wing up, instead of laying totally back. It's a big mess of a dry fly. It's just got CDC sticking out all over the place. But man, they land really, really soft. They float really well. They're really easy to see, especially with a little bit of poly and a little bit of that glow bright in there. Apparently I didn't put enough wraps right on that one. Normally this wing here would sit back about like that. Because I pulled it forward, I slipped my thread wrap off of it, it looks like, to make it go forward. That's okay. If I fish it, it'll still lay back just from the wind resistance of it will make it lay relatively back. But that's it. It's a CDC style of dry fly that's more Spaniard style, using lots of CDC. I usually leave mine really long like that. If they bother you, you could come in and trim them, but they're way easier to see like this. You can make them oversized. I was fishing with my friend Scott Barris on the green last blueing olive hatch last year, a little later than this. And he was rowing hard for us, putting us on rising fish all day long. And I was fishing a fly of this style, but in a bluing olive size, in about an 18. But I left the wing. The wing was kind of long enough that it could have been on like a 14, let's say. And he was blown away that I was catching fish. He didn't see me tying on. He's like, I can't believe you're catching fish on a fly that big. And I said, well, the fly is really small. He's like, no, it's huge. I can see it out there from a mile away. I said, well, that's because the wing's really big. He says, well, doesn't that bother him? You tell me. It doesn't seem to. It hasn't so far. You can leave that wing really long, really bulky. You can sparse it up if you want. That's it, though. Just a simple tide. The only real hack there is how to do the CDC part of it. I'm going to maybe do one more just so we can get the poly wing part of that right, so it doesn't sit so far forward. I needed to put one more wrap in there, apparently.
Have you seen those tied with just poly wings? With just the poly and not the CDC?
I've tied them with just poly, yeah.
Because I controlled a kid last year on the warm. I controlled a kid was from Spain, and he was fishing a fly just like that, but it was all kind of like a deep red body, just all deep red body, and it looked like it had just poly wings. It didn't look like it had any CDC.
No CDC?
That thing was deadly. I mean, he was killing.
Yeah, I'll bet. Yeah, I haven't seen that particular color combo, and they'll fish, like rusty spinner color. Is that kind of red you're thinking, or more red?
It was not a bright red. It kind of looked like a medium red.
Interesting. That's cool. We fished one in Tasmania that was like that. It was kind of a reddish color.
That thing was, man, he was killing.
Yeah, I tied some when we were in Spain. I was using dry flies. That was an important part of the competition, the World Championships there, and I used the CDC Spanish style flies, of course, in pre-fishing. But during the competition, we got tons of rain, and with all the rain, CDC doesn't work really well in heavy downpour. Whether it's really humid out or when it's just falling from the sky, it's hard to dry your fly. So I tied several with poly wings, just like you're describing. For me, they actually don't, in that situation, they had to be that way or they wouldn't float at all. But if it's a normal, warmer, even moderately warm, a day like today would be just fine to fish CDC. I find the CDC actually, to me, floats better and is easier for me to see than the poly. The poly wings, I can't get them to float as well.
It looked like he was using like a light gray, really light gray wing. Stood out pretty good.
I'll bet.
See it.
Yeah, why not?
Are
I
you
would try it.
adding, just a question from the checks, does floating affect the performance of the CDC? Or are you using floating on the
I am using floating, but you have to use the right floatings. That's a good question. So, yeah, so you need to use like Tiemco Dry Magic, Loon Locks, powder floatants, the CDC gels. You can't put gink, or you could dip them in Flyagro, works well too for CDC. Frogs, Fanny, Shimazaki Dry Shake, any of those. You can't do a Quell, you can't do gink, or the other popular ones.
Do you have a favorite for CDC?
Dry Magic probably is my favorite, or just Loon Loxa works really well too. The real magic there, I think, is using one of the fly banjos or the little rubber band trick. If you haven't seen that yet, check out that YouTube video we have out on our social media. First, we just were. That's another trick I learned from my Spanish friend Pablo. He just used little, well, actually Spanflex, because you could use a rubber band, but rubber band rots on your vest about every week and a half. So if you use Spanflex like this and just tie it in a knot, tie a loop in it and then loop it around something on your vest, you can then hook a fly to it, and it's because it stretches, you can strum the tip it, and it flings all the water off your dry fly. So when we first showed it, it was with something like that. Those wear out pretty quickly too. Not as quick as a rubber band, but quicker. So there's a company that created a little silicone-looking band that's called a fly banjo. It's it's a bit more expensive, but they last for years instead of a few months. Same thing. It's just got a little loop on it. You hook it to your vest somewhere. I'm sure we've got some up at the register here somewhere, but you hook your fly to it, and you can either strum the banjo, or I usually strum the tippet. And because it's flexed, it just flings all the water, especially with CDC or really light poly wings. It doesn't work so well on like a big chubby Chernobyl or something like that. It helps a little, but it's better on small, delicate dry flies, I think. But that helps them float for sure. Otherwise, yeah, just got to use the right floatant on CDC, and then you're in good shape. Definitely need to do some false casts with CDC flies, but there's something magic about CDC. It's like pheasant tail and peacock curl, I think. I don't know if it collects air bubbles, if it looks I don't know what it looks like to the fish. We're all left to speculate there, but it definitely works really well. It lands on the water super soft. I've gone to where I didn't bring one of my main dry fly box, but my main dry fly box is like, I don't fish compare duns. I don't fish sparkle duns anymore. You sure could. I'm not saying they don't catch fish. I just don't like tying them. They don't float as well. They're harder for me to see. I'm back to where I just fish parachutes for mayflies in this style, and that's pretty much it. I don't know. That's all a guy really needs anymore, seems like. I'm a simpleton though. I like to try and limit the number of, especially dry flies. I don't like to have too many dry flies. I don't think that the fly itself makes as big of a difference as we think it does. I think your presentation makes a bigger difference. So if I'm going blueing olive fishing, I'll have 2 or 3 different patterns in my box, but I'm not going to have 400 different patterns in my box. Let's do one more of those. Maybe we can do it in smaller. I think I had some 14s or something around here. We'll do it in maybe like a smaller style, or maybe even better than that. We'll do like a little bluing olive size. There's also another style that is doesn't have a tail. Let's do this style. This will be a fun one. And I won't use any poly either. So the other style that works really well for me, the same type of dry fly, but no tail and on a curved hook. So this time this is a 2457 because that's what I have right in front of me. Ideally, it would be a 2487, the lighter wire dry fly hook, or a 2488 would work well too. But a curved nymph hook of your favorite brand. Thank you. Same thread. I'm going to make this one kind of a bluing olive, I think. Yeah, I've got some gray olive. That'll work perfect. One of the things my friend Pablo really instilled in me on this style of fly is that you don't want a tail. On the last one we did, sure, it's going to lay flush. That's great. But anything you're trying to make kind of curved hook where it's kind of in the film, I don't want a trailing shuck. I don't want antron. I don't want Zelon. I don't want hackle. I don't want any sort of tail. If you do anything at all, maybe put a little bit of the dubbing as you could just cut a bit of it to have as a tail shuck, but I don't even put anything on there at all. The reason for that is it makes the fly, when it's curved, it often makes the fly sit on its side instead of sitting down in. So we want to use the weight of the hook in this case to kind of be our anchor point. So I'm adding some gray olive super fine right now, and we're going to make a body that's pretty thin, pretty sparse. And you could also do these with quill bodies. You could do these with synthetic quills, whatever your favorite dubbing is for a little bluing olive. This happens to be one of my favorites. There are a couple others that have worked well for me too, but just creating a thin body. And I'm going to change that in the hook, change angles. Where did I put those? We can reuse these pieces of Globerite even. For this one, I probably don't need poly because it's going to be small enough that I can just use the Globerite. So I'll capture it, fold it over. We're going to do the same thing we did on the last one, where we're going to use a bit more dubbing and just create a little dubbing ball so that we'll stand the wing up. These have been deadly. In fact, my friend Pablo gave me one of his, literally one. And I was on the Provo one day with Curtis from Fly Fish Food, and the fish were being really snotty. And I went through several of my flies, and I thought, I'm going to try Pablo's fly for a second here. I put his on, and immediately they started crushing it. Pissed me off. Mine didn't look that much different. I asked him, I actually messaged him after that. I sent him a picture. I said, you gave me one of these, but I can't figure out what the dubbing is. What is this? He kind of chuckled. He says, oh, yep, you Americans can never figure out what it is. It's an American dubbing. It was, I remember the Tyrite dubbings. Tyrite, they're still sold. I found some. I bought, I think, every package they had of this one particular color. It's a number. I can't remember the number. I'd have to look it up, but it's kind of a brownish olive, and it's almost spectrumized color. So it's not all dyed one color. And it looks, to me, it looks nothing like a blue wing olive because it's got too much rusty orange to it that's blended into the olive brown, but they eat it really well. He says that's the best color for blue wing olives. And it's called, like, it might be called Quill Gordon, or it's a funny color. It's not called blue wing olive, but it's what he uses for all of his blue wing olives. Anyway.
Must look when it hits the water.
Yeah, maybe it looks like the trailing shuck of a. That's the only thing I can figure is that the back end of it looks like the shuck of a mayfly, because I don't know. I can't figure out why they'd eat it otherwise. It doesn't look quite like the blue wings. Same process here. Otherwise, only that this is going to be smaller, so I don't need quite as much length. So I can use closer to the tip because the fibers don't have to be quite as long. And I probably won't need to use 2 feathers in this one because it's a smaller fly. So I'll just get away with 1, I'll bet. We'll see how much I get out of here, but you guys see what I'm doing? I'm just trimming these in little V's. In fact, I'm going to trim that down just a bit more. So they
Hold
look,
your hand down a little bit. Yeah, there you go.
they look like that, just a little V shape.
How many feathers are you using?
This is just 1 feather, but it's a large. It's the premium, the Swiss CDC, like ultra premium. It's a pretty big feather for CDC anyway. In a standard, like if you had a Nature Spirit or a Trout Hunter or a Hairline or just about any other brand, you might need 2 or 3 of those feathers because they're a lot smaller. Same thing. I'm just taking all these fibers and kind of stacking the stems. Can you see what I did there? Stems are kind of laid right on top of each other as best I can. So I've got kind of a V in there. And I'm just pulling them all together like so. I'm going to try and feel for where the stems end. And I'm going to try and tie them in right on top of the shank. Crank on those buggers with this strong thread. Then I like to twist these up. And I've switched to where I've often been putting 2 colors of Globerite in mine so that, because sometimes in one light, one color shows up better than the other. You know, in bright sun, for instance, the orange I usually see best. And in more cloudy conditions, I often see this green color better. So I've been adding sometimes 2 of them to it. So I've just split the wing with the Globerite. I'm going to put a couple extra wraps so I don't ruin this one this time to hold that Globerite back. And I'm going to move the thread right back to the eye. And we're just going to whip finish. I like to try and, I pull hard enough on my thread. I like to support the hook so that I don't bend the hook while I'm getting rid of the thread. Then I usually leave this just a little bit longer on that pattern and trim these, again, shorter than my wing. And I would, again, leave those maybe not quite that long, but let's say somewhere in that. I don't want to trim them too short. I want to leave them pretty long. The wing of a natural blue wing is nowhere near that, but the fish are not focused on that. They're going to see the body that's kind of hanging down in the film a little bit, and the wing's just going to kind of capture the fly in the surface. So again, if you're tying this one at home, a slightly lighter wire hook would be ideal. But that's, other than that, that's kind of the pattern. And if you want to make them more buoyant, you add another layer or two of CDC. Otherwise, that's pretty much it. What else? Should we do another CDC dry fly? Should we do a corn-fed caddis? Or have you had enough? Do a corn-fed. Do the corn-fed. All right. Well, let's find some hooks for that. I need that one. I do need this. Let's do a peacock version. That'll work. Head dry fly. There we go. 14's right there. So this is a Tiemco 100. Again, your favorite dry fly hook. Insert there as you would like. The corn-fed, for me, this dominates my dry fly box for caddis anyway. I've gotten to where I haven't tied an elk hair caddis in probably a decade. I don't really know. Not that they don't work. I've caught fish on them. I'm not trying to suggest that. They're just, there's a couple advantages to CDC flies, whether you're doing that Spanish style we just passed around or this one here. One of the hacks I learned in competition fishing, one of the many, is, well, number one, when you get a fish to eat a dry fly or any fly, you really want to convert that fish. You want to connect to that fish. When you're in competition, one fish makes all the difference in the world. I mean, the number of times that you win or lose a session by one fish is crazy. So when we're just fishing for fun, you hook a fish, you lose a fish, that happens, right? When your results boil down to, holy cow, if I would have just caught one more fish in that session, I would have been world champion or something like that. All of a sudden you have a lot of care about converting every single fish that you can. You're still going to miss some. We're all human. Sometimes even if you do everything right, the fish don't get the fly completely. There's outliers here. But what I'm getting at is when you fish really stiff, I would call it, dry fly, like an elk hair caddis with a stiff elk hair wing and a stiff hackle, the stiffness is cool because it floats really well. It's pretty easy to see. The disadvantage is it's a big bulky fly that, sometimes a fish has a hard time getting in their mouth. And when they do, there's a lot keeping it from going in their mouth. When you fish a little CDC pattern, you've got the hook and you have a big profile of a wing, but when the fish goes to eat it, all that wing collapses. There's no stiffness, no rigidity to keep the fish to make it harder for the fish to take the fly in. When I fish with my friend Pablo, when I've been working on my dry fly technique with him, even when I hook a fish and I think I've done everything right, I set up a perfect cast and I hook the fish and I play the fish and I land the fish. I think I've won. You bring it into the net and he'll look at it and he'll see where it's hooked and he'll be like, nope, didn't do it right. It's not down far enough if it's not like in the mouth. If I hook it on the rim of the mouth, didn't do it right. You didn't get a good enough drift to let the tippet was in the way, or you ran out of drag-free drift too soon. It kept that fly from getting it. He's like, if they're not choking on it, not literally, but if it's not in there a little ways, you could have done better. I asked them years ago about, they don't have grayling in Spain, just like we don't have grayling fishing much. We have grayling around here, but we have Arctic grayling in our high lakes, like in Utah especially. We have a handful of tiny streams that have grayling in them, but we don't really have any rivers that have grayling in them, right? You could go to Alaska and catch a bunch of grayling, but they're Arctic grayling. And when you go to Europe to compete in the World Championships, you're mostly competing for European grayling, which are a bit different than the Arctic grayling as far as their habits and things. So it always baffled me that the Spaniards could do so well grayling fishing, because when it was like 70% grayling and 30% or 20% trout or whatever, the Americans usually struggled because we're going up against some of the countries that have grayling to fish for 30 years, and we're trying to figure out what we can in a week of pre-fishing to compete against them. And the Spaniards always did really well. Not as well as they would if it was all trout, but they did really well still. So I asked my friend Paula one day, I'm like, what is it that makes you guys better than you think some of the other countries that don't have grayling to fish for? And he said, a couple things, but one of them was dry fly fishing. He said, we're really good at getting natural drifts, and we use flies that the smallmouth grayling can get in very easily. And when you hook a grayling, when you hook it inside their mouth, they're pretty rubbery. They said that you're not losing those fish. Where the way that you guys fish them, like they love to come up and eat a bionic ant or an elk hair caddis, but you miss like 30% of them because they just don't get the fly in. They have a small mouth and they try and eat it. They can't get it. CDC flies fold when they eat them. It's just like there's nothing there but the hook, so they suck them in really easy. So anyway, long story short, you just convert more fish when you fish a fly that's not so rigid and so hard for the fish to take. And this has played out for me over and over and over since then, where I just, like I said, I've just stopped fishing elk hair style flies. As beautiful as they are and as fun as they are to tie, I should say that. I shouldn't say that. I don't like tying them actually, but I hate dealing with hair. But they are beautiful. I think it's a cool natural material. It's a classic material. I think it's not as effective as it could be. Anyway, CDC style patterns allow the fish to get them into their mouth, get the fly into their mouth a lot easier than a more rigid pattern. So this fly, the cornfed caddis, is available commercially in tan, in olive, and in, I need to go back to here. Oh, you were sleeping on the job. Glad one of us is paying attention. Tan and olive, and there's a new one that's a peacock version, which I'll do the peacock version. A lot of the parts are the same. So I use the same trailing shuck material. So on this fly, because it's a straight shank, not a curved shank, I would use a trailing shuck. I do favor that compared to, say, putting a elk hair or deer hair tail on there, for instance. This is Antron from Wapsie, and the color is called PMD shuck, which you'd think wouldn't be useful for a caddis, but it's my favorite caddis shuck color. It's actually not my favorite PMD color because I think PMD shucks should be more rusty than that.
What color is that?
It's called PMD Shuck Olive from Wapsie. So I just trimmed a little bit of it away. You don't need very much of this. Sparse, I think, is key here. I don't like to make a really, really big, bulky trailing shuck. Doesn't take very much. I'm going to trim that down lengthwise, but got it tied in about where I want it. I'm going to trim it to maybe half that length, somewhere in that neighborhood. So it's got a little shuck on there, but not too much. Next up, I'm going to use just the tying thread actually for a rib. So I'm going to pull a bunch of this out, just tie over itself. Then I'm just going to trim one leg of that away. Then you can also use monofilament for the rib on this if you'd like. I'm going to grab 2 peacock herls. I'm going to pull on them to where they don't break so easily anymore and hope that I don't break them. Peacock's like pheasant tail, right? It's magic material, but it sure breaks easily. Very, very fragile. But that's why I usually start with 2, because then if I end up with 1, I'm still usually okay. Probably only need 1 really to wrap on a fly this size. But I'm going to be pretty ginger about wrapping it through here so that I don't break those herls. I'm going to get it about 3/4 of the way up the shank. And then I'm going to tie that off. And then one way to make your peacock much more durable is to wrap either monofilament or, in this case, tying thread. Just counter wrap some other material through it. So I wrap the peacock that direction. I'm going to counter wrap now with this thread. It does bind the fibers down a little bit, which doesn't make it look quite as clean when it's brand new. But once you fish that fly, all those fibers go every which way and lay kind of flat anyway, so I'm not too concerned about that. Then I'm just going to trim that away. And now I've just basically, every one of those wraps of the herls that were going this direction, I now counter wrap them going the other way, so it's really locked in there. That lasts quite a while now. That's I would say as durable as dubbing at that point. If you don't do that step, then 2 or 3 fish in, a trout's tooth nicks that, and one of those peacock herls comes undone on you, right? Okay. Next up, we need to do a wing. So the corn-fed caddis, I named it the corn-fed caddis because it's corn-fed. Some of the descriptions, I called it a linebacker at ballerina class because it's a big, as CDC flies go, it's kind of uses a lot of bulk, a lot of CDC. The original versions of this, in fact, if you look at our old YouTube video that's probably 5 or 6 years old now, I used to just use the tips of several CDC fibers like this and tied over the stems. Because of the influence of my friend Pablo, I've stopped doing that on my own. I think commercially they're actually still done that way. But to get rid of some of the rigidity, I'm doing the same process we were doing before, where I'm trimming these CDC feathers into little.
Are you done with your cradle?
Oh, sure, it's in the way. No, I'm never done with the cradle, but it's always in the way. Thank you. The cradle always gets in the way. Brigham has to yell at me at that all the time on our YouTube videos because I'm just in the habit of flinging it and it kind of goes right in the middle of the camera. So I'm going to use a couple of feathers here because I want to build a fair bit of bulk in this wing. That's why I call it that linebacker at ballerina class. Or ballet class, either way. It's not as sparse as most CDC flies are. In fact, Paul, that I work with on a daily basis, likes to remind me that when I first got to know him like 20 years ago, he said he remembers me telling him that I hated CDC flies because they were too delicate. And I probably said that. He's probably right. But that was because I was looking at most of the flies tied at the time, and they were all so sparse and so dainty that in most of the faster pocket water streams that I fished, they just didn't float very long because they would have like a CDC feather on them, right? Not several. So I'm going to really bulk this up. I've created a bunch of those now, those little V's. I'm just going to start stacking with my fingers. Because I'm using natural CDC, this is undyed, so it has lighter color on the bottom and darker color towards the top. So what I'm going to do is use the darker colors on the bottom of the fly and put the lighter butts of the feather on top so it's easier for me to see. And the fish are still getting the darker color on the bottom, if that makes any sense. So some of these fibers are going to go underneath, and some of them, that's why if you can see me kind of moving some on top, some on bottom. Here's another light one that I want on the top.
Can you do that?
No, you can't see me do that, but I'm sticking it right here. I'll show you when I get them all collected. I'll show you what it looks like. It's a whole bunch of CDC, and it's a bit of a mess until you get it all laid out here. So I've just taken all of these CDC fibers, these little V cuts that I made in those. I think I used 3 feathers for this one. You might just need 2 if they're big. Okay, I've got most of those stacked together. I'm going to try and even up the tips a little, or the stems a little bit. So now it looks something like this. I've got all the stems about even with right there. And I'm going to pull all the fibers forward as best I can, like this, to use as my wing.
How many total feathers did you use there?
I'd have to go back and review the video, instant replay. I think I had at least 2, possibly 3. One of them was a little smaller than the other 2, but this is a 14. Again, if you had really long fibers, you might be able to get away with 1. Really long CDC feather, you might get away with 1 feather. If they're shorter, you might need 2, 3, or 4 of them. And you adjust that based on the hook size as well, the amount of bulk you want. So I've got all those. Now the stems are right here. There's where this, kind of where the stems start. So I can tie it in right where my fingers end. So I'm just going to pinch that right on top of the hook. Try and capture that with this, again, super strong nano silk thread. That way I can really bind on those. I'm also supporting the hook because I'm pulling so hard that I'd probably bend the hook if I didn't support it. Then I'm going to put some wraps in just to hold that tension. I'm going to go in here and try and carefully trim these butts and hope not to cut so close that I cut my thread all the way out of there. I'll try and get a couple of those extra stems that I left right there. And this one, you can give it a trim. What I tend to do instead of trimming it is just break some of those fibers off to make them a little bit shorter, but I've been leaving mine longer and longer. The caddis wing should really probably end about where my fingers are there. But I just don't find that the fish care very much. And man, it's It floats better and it's easier for me to see with the oversized wing. And down the road, if I'm fishing the river and I want it smaller, I can just go like this, right? I can make it shorter. I can't make it any longer. It doesn't grow. So I'm going to wrap through those butts a little bit more, try and hold them in place. Then I'm going to use this same white poly. This is just EP trigger point. I've even got a little bit of glow bright, which the commercially available don't come with glow bright in them. In my own, I've been putting glow bright. There's a strand in there.
Instead of that, why you use a little bit of glow bright?
I've got both. So I've got white and the glow bright in this one. So I'm going to tie over it and then hopefully, there we go, wrap back like so. So this is going on top of the CDC wing. This is just for me to see. And then the poly also adds a bit of buoyancy. When the CDC starts to get waterlogged, that poly will still hold this fly up. It makes it easier to see. And again, you could put orange glow bright, green, pink, whatever color you think you'd see best on top of that. I find the glow bright in green when it's low light shows up best for me, and I tend to fish caddis a lot in the evenings when it's low light, so I've been using green quite a bit. Okay, the next step is to create a bit of a CDC wing, or sorry, CDC hackle.
What number of green is that glow bright?
This is number 12. Let's see here. We need our dubbing loop spinner. I'm going to create a thread loop again. I'm going to close it off, and I'm just going to leave that hanging here for a second. Then I'm going to get a bit of dubbing. What should I use for this one? Maybe something dark. That dark olive will work. I need to put a little bit of dubbing on here to coat the thread. It doesn't take much. But I find if you don't put dubbing on there, the CDC hackle likes to slide off because the wing is angled slightly. So if I just build this up a tiny bit with this dubbing, the dubbing's soft enough that it allows the hackle that I'm about to build to bite into that, the thread to bite into it, and it won't slide down the shank as much. Okay, the last step of this fly is to take, well, you can either use a feather prepper or a pedagine clamp, or you can find 2 CDC feathers that are similarly sized. This is the way I usually do mine. And I've got, let's pull them apart here so you can see. I've got 2 CDC feathers. I'm going to lay one right on top of the other, try and line the stems up as best I can. Then I'm going to stroke, by holding the tips of them, I'm going to stroke all the fibers down to try and straighten them out like that. Then I'm going to reach in here with this fancy Swiss clamp and capture all the fibers on one side like so. Then I'm going to trim these fibers away from the stem like this. Is that your sign again?
Yep.
I think it's nice. So then I'm left with just the butts and the CDC, no stems in there at all, right? Then I'm going to come back into this thread loop. And again, the reason I like this is when I push up on that, those little spring steel arms open this up. I can stick my tool in here now. See if I can do this up. Don't usually do this up, so this is going to be awkward, but I'm going to pull that down to about there. Oh, see if I can do it. I got it. I'm going to open that up. Because I pulled tight on this, I've trapped the CDC in there now. And I'm going to spin this up and make a CDC hackle out of it. So there's no even stiff, fancy whiting hackle to keep the fish from getting this fly. Then the last step is just to wrap this hackle through the fly. This fly is super buggy, has a lot of motion. I fish it a lot by itself, but I also fish it quite a bit with a dropper and do the old bouncing caddis technique on a Euro rig where you fish a tungsten fly. You can bounce this caddis around on a dropper tag as your top fly, and the fish go nuts for it when it's bouncing like it's an ovipositing caddis laying eggs. Okay. This thread's awesome because it just builds so little bulk. Even though you put extra wraps in on everything, it just doesn't build up enough bulk to cover your eye or anything. Semperfli Nano Silk. Whip finish, and we're basically done. I like to leave those front hackles super long too. If they really bother you, you can always go in and trim them. Sometimes I'll trim them on the bottom so that they're not so long on the very bottom, but I like to leave the top ones long. Some caddis have, you've probably seen the longhorn sedge. Some of them have really long antenna. Some of them have really long gangly legs. And when you cast this, it ends up kind of laying back mostly anyway. If you wanted to, you could even come in with a Velcro tool. If some of those didn't open up quite like you wanted, you could stroke some of those fibers back. That's a peacock corn-fed caddis. It's a deadly just attractor fly, but it's also really effective for the Mother's Day caddis that are upcoming. You got kind of that lighter green trailing shuck, the darker body that the peacock provides. You could also tie them in olive, for a Mother's Day caddis. But if you haven't fished a corn-fed, that's another one that is starting to catch on. It's been a slow catch-on process for sure. At least in my own fly box, I have enough flies out there now that I'm really confident in several of them that I use all the time, and this is one of them, and it's one that I think relative to its effectiveness sells mediocre, if that makes sense. Anyway, that's the peacock corn-fed caddis. And I think that's about it. Anybody have any more questions? No? About anything? Any technique questions or anything else?
What's a typical competition like when you're out fishing competitively?
Well, it depends a bit on whether it's a mini comp or a world championship or nationals, but a nationals or a world championship would be a 5-session competition. The world championships the last few years have transitioned to where they are a 5-day event for the competition. So you just fish 1 session per day. For most of my career competing, if you could call it that, it was 2 sessions the first day, 2 sessions the second day, and 1 session the last day. But they've gone to where it's one session per day for 3 hours. So basically, all the competitors get you have 5 competitors per country and per team, and then there's a random draw, and every competitor will fish 1 beat on every one of the venues. So if you had, the Henry's Fork as one venue and the South Fork of the Snake, in 2 separate areas, one venue higher and one venue lower, maybe. You did Henry's Lake as a venue, and you did Madison as a venue or something like that, or you could do another lake. You could do Sheridan or something like that. You'd have 5 different venues, and every angler is going to spend 1 3-hour session on every one of those venues, but on different days. So then you get put into a group, A, B, C, D, or E. And of those groupings, so you're competing only against the people in your group. So if this side of the room is group A and this side of the room is group B, let's say you went to the Henry's Fork and you went to the South Fork on day 1, your scores only are compared and contrasted against per session anyway, against your group. So if you caught the most fish in that first session, you'd get first place. You get 1 placing point, and you'd also get 20 points for every centimeter of fish you catch. So you have 2 scores. You have a placing point score, which is who catches the most total centimeters of fish, and you have a fish point score, which is a combination of the whole competition. So that's session 1. Session 2, let's see, you 2 flip-flopped. You guys now go to South Fork, and you guys go to Henry's Fork. And in session 2, if you caught 0 fish, you would get the maximum number of placing points, because there's 2 scores. You have a placing point that is you want to stay as low as possible, and a fish point score that you want to be as high as possible. So the way the points work is it's just based on your score, however many fish, total centimeters of fish you catch, the highest number of centimeters, highest score, or lowest score in this case, first place, second place, third place, on and on. But if it's really tough fishing, and only, let's say there are 30 people in your group, which would be pretty typical for a competition, a world championship competition, 30, 35, you would have, let's say if it's tough, you might have 12 people that catch fish and everybody else doesn't. That means there's going to be someone that has 1 placing point, 2, 3, 4, all the way through 12. And then everybody that didn't catch a fish gets 30 placing points because they blanked, they call it. So they get the maximum score. At the end of all the sessions, every group has fished every one of the venues 1 time, and you have a placing point score and a fish point score. Placing point scores trump everything. So at the end, most world championships, I would argue, are won with 6, 7, 8, sometimes 10 placing points. It's rare that it's more than 10 or 12 anyway for a world champion. So if you blank, if you get 30 placing points in one of your sessions, there's no chance, right? I've seen, I told the story last night of my friend Pablo. He was one time he was the closest I've ever seen anybody to medaling. He was in world championship position going into the last day. He was in first place. He needed to catch fish on the lake, and he blanked the lake, and he still only dropped to 4th place because he was so far ahead of everybody else. Normally, if you blank, you'd be in 24th place or 30th or way down the list. So a typical day is waking up, depends on where you're going, but oftentimes at 5 or 6 in the morning, going down and getting breakfast. You'd have all your gear prepped the night before, run back up to your room, put on your sunscreen, get all your waders and boots on usually, go down to the bus, get on the proper bus, go to the venue. You have a controller that's assigned to you. Speaking of which, if anybody wants to volunteer, it's a fun thing to do. As you were mentioning last night's presentation, the World Championships are coming here to Idaho in September, so there's a cool opportunity to go be a controller and watch some of the anglers fish. Ask me later if you want more information about that. But you'd go to your venue, you'd get teamed up with your controller. They keep track of time for you, and they keep track of measuring the fish for you, because we all know how trustworthy fishermen are. They would never lie about the size or numbers of their fish. So you have a fail-safe there, somebody that's keeping score for you. And then in more recent times, like in the last 15 years anyway, 10, 15 years, they even added an element of the home team, so that they can't have, so the U.S. team, if you go to this competition and you're a controller, if you happen to get one of the U.S. team members, they will also have an international observer with them, so that, if I'm one of their controllers, I can't just write extra fish on their scoreboard, because those sorts of things happen in the home country sometimes, because they want the home country to win so bad. So they will have an international observer with the home country. Anyway, you get to the venue. Usually you have about 30 minutes minimum to scout the beat. You'd walk along staying as far off the water as possible, but being able to see your beat, if it's a river beat anyway. And you'd kind of log away. Most people just in their brain. Some people take notes on a phone. But you just log away where you think the prime spots are that you want to fish. You might look at it and make a decision as to which rigs. You're going to fish dries, you're going to fish streamers, you're going to fish nymphs, you're going to fish dry dropper, maybe all the above. How many rods you want to set up. Maybe you're looking at it and all you're going to, the water's high in the same color as this table. You probably don't need a lot of dry flies, right? You might streamers and nymphing. Anyway, you're going to evaluate your beat. Then once that's done, you're basically all rigged up. Everybody starts at the same time. Everybody, you have a controller that's watching a clock, and they'll count you down from 10 seconds or so. And usually you're standing on the side of the river ready to make a cast as soon as they say go. And they say go, and for 3 hours you're trying to catch as many fish as you can in that particular venue and in that beat. So it's a randomly drawn beat. So there would be, if there's 30 countries, there'd be 30 beats, and they're all relatively the same length. They're not all the same numbers of fish in them, right? So it's a random draw that can hurt or help you. But you try and catch as many fish as you can within the rules. Of course, you can't break the rules. You got a person there watching you. But yeah, you're just trying to catch the most total fish you can. And then at the end of the session, every time you catch a fish, you basically land a fish, hook a fish, play a fish, land a fish, run the fish over to the controller. They have a little measuring tray that they get wet. You stick the fish quickly in the measuring tray. They stick the head up against the board at the end of it. You look at the tail and you agree on a length. You release the fish. They get out a little clipboard and write down the length of the fish, an abbreviation for the species, and then they have you initial in the end that you agree to that. And then you go back to fishing again. And you do that process hopefully a whole bunch of times, sometimes only once or twice.
You keep changing rods and
many times as you want. Mm-hmm.
Whatever you want.
Yep. Yeah, there's a bunch of rules in place there as far as sizes of flies, weights of flies, lengths of leaders, what you can and can't.
I did it when they had it at Jackson. I was
97
controller for the French team. It was pretty interesting.
I'll bet that'd be interesting. Yes.
I never seen anybody fish so fast and catch so many fish.
Yeah. Yeah. Very efficient.
I mean,
it's
just
all
like a mechanic.
yeah, it's all about efficiency in that case,
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah.
you're on a timeline, so you got to try and maximize your catch in every single situation. So everything they do, from tying knots to approaching the river, trust me, they're trying to fish every last little piece of water that they think has a shred of a chance of catching a fish, but they're going to try and make it so that they're not going to try and make 10 crappy casts. They're going to make every cast count. Obviously, nobody's perfect, right? But you're trying to be as efficient as possible. So you'd get all of that done. Then in today's method, you then get done. You tally the scores. You get back on the bus. Everybody, all the competitors are always talking to each other to try and figure out who caught the most fish, so they have an idea of. You don't know it completely because it's based on total centimeters, but if you caught 12 and she caught 11, there's a chance that her 11 might be longer than your 12. But if you're in the same venue, the average usually makes it so that whoever has 12 usually has the most fish points. But occasionally you can get lapped there. Does that make sense? If all of her 11 were 20 inchers and your 12 were, 2 of them were 20 inchers and the rest of them were 8 inchers, you'd probably lose, right?
Yeah.
It's all barbless. Yep, 100% barbless. You can't add anything to the leader that floats or sinks the leader other than flies. So there's no strike indicators, no split shots.
No
Yeah.
beads over 4 millimeters.
No beads over 4 millimeter. Yep. They have all kinds of, the rules are actually very elaborate and long and hard to understand. I think it's honestly over-regulated, but I don't get to make those decisions. So
It's a normal stream, normal situation. What would you normally start out fishing with?
oh boy, it just depends on what's going on. Are there anything, what time of year is it? Is there anything hatching? I mean, common things you would do in a competition situation would be, of course, you're evaluating what you think you could catch fish on. If you thought you could catch a bunch of fish on dries, you might kind of stay on the banks or in very shallow water and fishing shallow to slightly deeper water, but from a distance with a dry fly rig, because you can cover a lot of water that way. And some people would fish their whole beat from like one bank, all going all the way up the beat from the shallows, casting dries. Then they'd run back down to the bottom and grab a dry dropper or nymph rig and go through it with nymphs or a dry dropper. And then sometimes you'd go back down and go through it again with a dry dropper or a nymph rig. And sometimes you'd go down and you leave a streamer rig at the top and come back down stringing streamers, stripping streamers. Sometimes you just nymph it because it's cold and the fish aren't rising, and you'd nymph from start to finish, and you'd nymph all the way up and come back down and nymph it again. Or depending on how the competition was. For myself, I like to, if I thought that it was going to be really high numbers, then you'd go really fast. You'd cover it super fast and as efficient as possible, and then run back down, because by the time you're done at the top, if it's a 200-meter beat, you're probably an hour in or so. The fish at the bottom have been rested now for 45 minutes at minimum. So you're back into them again and you can go through it a second time. If I thought it was one of those competitions where I need to eke out 1 or 2 fish, then I'm probably going to go super slow and very methodical and make sure every spot that I think has the most potential is covered very thoroughly, because I just need 1 or 2 fish to survive, right? I mean, competitions vary from blanking to catching 0 fish to, I think the most I've ever heard of in a 3-hour session was 78 fish. The most I've ever caught was 62 in a 3-hour session. And when you do that, keep in mind, you're not just catching them, you're catching them, running them across the river halftime to a controller, watching, controllers are trying their best, but usually watching somebody fumble the fish more than you'd like because you're in a hurry and everything seems like they're taking forever, even though they're trying their best. But sliding a fish in there, agreeing on a length. Some people write really slow, and you're like, come on, I'm under pressure here. Anyway, you're measuring every fish and then running back out and catching other fish. And when if you're getting 50 plus fish in a 3-hour session, you're catching 2 at a time, several times. Where you have 2 fish on, landing 2 fish, scoring 2 fish, 2 or 3 or 4 times in a session. Most of the time you don't have time to be making, you can't go 5 or 6 minutes without a fish. You just have to keep moving and keep pushing when it's that kind of fishing. Other times you're literally trying to catch 1 in 200, 300 yards of water. So it varies.
I noticed that most of the competitors, almost all of them, started out dry flies first.
Yeah, it's common. It's an interesting fly fishing competition is really misunderstood. I think it's painted as like this nymphing only. I mean, the number of times that I've been asked if I'm on the U.S. Czech nymphing team is astronomical. Like people, because they just don't understand that it's number one, that it's not only nymphing. Two, that we don't call it Czech nymphing anymore. But it's funny what people think, and other people just say, "So you still on that nymphing team?" And I'm like, "No, I've never been on a nymphing team. What are you talking about?" And they're like, "Oh, I thought that's all you guys did." And no, that's a very effective technique. Certainly something we do, but you got to be able to fish dries. I mean, anybody that's done well at a world championship, I promise you, is very, very skilled at a whole bunch of different techniques. You can't get very far only knowing, being a one-trick pony. Only knowing how to nymph will only get you so far, right? Because just like you said, there are times you need to fish dries. The number of times where dry flies have saved me is astronomical, and also lakes. I would argue the U.S. team has done a lot of its damage the last few years. I didn't send this one around. Maybe not so much real recently, but in the last 20 years anyway, one of the things that turned the corner for us was our lake fishing. I got on the team in 2003, and I'm not on the team anymore. I'm still involved with the team a little bit because I'm on the advisory board. But when I got on the team, we had finished, I think the best we'd ever done as a team was 10th place. So when it was in Jackson, I think we were last or second to last on our home water, right? And the team changed about that time. It started changing from, we started trying to recruit better anglers, let's just say. And that was a slow process, but by about 2003, that process had really kind of started. And by about 2005 or 6, that really took off. And we had regional events that had a way of not just looking at somebody and saying, "Hey, I think that person fishes well," but actually making them have results before they get on the team. And ever since then, it's basically been run by numbers. So the top 15 points earners in the country make Team USA. Doesn't matter where you're from. They don't care who you've guided for. None of that matters. It's all about results. If you don't get results, you don't make the team. But the lake fishing for us, for me in particular, it was one of the things that made a lot of my successes possible, because I was always okay on the rivers in a world championship situation. I would argue we're most of us our own worst critic, and I think that's true of me. But I'm above average as an angler as far as river fishing goes, but I think I'm well above average on lake fishing. And in that competition scene, that really helped me a lot. To where the number of I've won a lot of sessions over my, I think I did 16 world championships. I don't know exactly how many sessions I won, but on average, 1 per competition, maybe 2 per competition, something like that. And more often than not, if I won just one, it was probably on a lake.
Why do you think we're so good at fishing?
We put a lot of focus on it. We're not the best at it, I wouldn't say, but we just made lots of improvements there. It was a focus point for us because we saw other teams that were succeeding doing that. And being that the competitions were held largely in Europe, we always came to the realization that we're just not going to know the waters as well as some of the other teams are. Europe is a big continent too, but I mean, if you're in, I use the example of my friend that's from Spain or from France, that when we had the championships a few years ago in Spain, he lived like 4.5 hours from the competition venue. So he was going over there every other weekend to go practice the competition venues. We got to go pre-fish him for like 6 days, right before. He'd been there for 2 or 3 years going religiously. The other teams can go from the Czech Republic, can drive across the border to Slovakia and to Bosnia and to Poland and to all the other places that we visited. And, the Portuguese can go to Spain and Spain to Portugal and so on. Anyway, so we always had a disadvantage that way, I think. So we just looked at some of the other teams and thought we're already pretty good river anglers. That tends to be what Americans have done a lot of anyway. There are a lot of, in this area, there's a lot of lake anglers too, because we have a lot of good lakes. Utah's very similar to southeastern Idaho in that regard. But if you get outside of this little bubble here, there's not a lot of lake anglers in the U.S. It's just, It's just a fact. There just aren't that. I mean, there are some, but relative to numbers of anglers that are fishing rivers, like go to Pennsylvania, nobody fishes trout lakes. Go to North Carolina, bass, but not trout. Go to New York, there's a few more trout lakes there, but still not known for that. So lakes are just an opportunity for us. I also always liked lakes, so it was easy for me to, I didn't have to get motivated to try to fish lakes. I just liked it anyway. I don't know, that was something that I think helped us a lot. I don't know how I got on that topic. Did I answer your question?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, anyway, that would be your typical day. At the end of the competition, everybody's everything comes out in the wash. We were talking about this last night in the grand scheme of the competition. I say everything comes out in the wash because all teams, the 5-person team is going to have some people that get bad beats, some people get good beats, some people get really good beats, and some people get death beats. But that every team gets some of that. But individually, if you draw one of those death beats, it hurts you a lot, right? So it's we were talking about this last night in that the number of times that drawing one beat up or downstream makes a difference in you being able to medal or be world champion is almost everybody that's finished in the top 20 or so has stories of, man, if I would have just got the beat right above me and had, a beat that was averaging 10 fish a session instead of a beat that was averaging 0 to 1 fish per session, I could have been the world champion, right? It's an interesting game because it's not totally fair because you're, it's as fair as they make it, but it is a random draw. Who you fish behind, the order you fish the beats. An example that would be if you fish like in Spain. I'll go back to Spain a couple years ago. The lake we fished was a stocked pond. It's really stupid, dumb. I hate that venue because it kicked my butt. But if the very first session on that lake, they'd stocked it heavily, and the guys that were winning it with like 50 or 60 fish. The second session, the next day, the numbers dropped to like 30 fish. And the third session to like 15 fish. And by the time I fished it, it was like 8 or 9 fish, right? So we all fished the same venue, but the competitors that got to fish it first, my group's fish total, our fish point score will never get close to theirs because we didn't have that same opportunity. We fished the same lake, but we fished the lake after the fish had all been beat on for 4 days, right? They just get progressively harder. And that's the case on all the venues. But then on the lake, on a bank lake like that, you rotate beats. You're not just stuck on one beat. You fish a beat for like 40 minutes and then they'll blow a horn and you move down like whatever the random number is that day, 3 beats, 5 beats, 7 beats. So you kind of cover different pegs around the lake. On a river, you get your 1 beat for 3 hours and that's the only one you get. But you end up sometimes fishing behind, I won't throw any countries under the bus because we're live streaming, but there are some countries you'd much rather fish behind than others, let's say, right? If you fish behind one of the best anglers on planet Earth and they fished a river right before you, it's not so good for your chances right after them. On the flip side, if you fish behind somebody that's not so skilled, they probably rested a lot of your fish for you. It's just almost as good as it not being fished in some cases. Most of the competitors are very, very competitive and very focused. There are a few countries that run their program in, I think, what is a strange way where somebody has the rights to the team. They just take a few friends. I mean, I've seen a few countries that some of their competitors spend more time smoking than they do fishing in each of the sessions. So they're not taking it too serious, I don't think. Yeah, I don't know. Any other questions on a competition situation? Yeah. Getting into it, you need to go to flycomps.com and you need to go to the Team USA website and go to the Phipps Moosh website and read the rules so you can start adapting your fishing to the rules. Because if you're going to do it, I think you need to jump in with both feet and you ought to just stop doing anything that's not allowed in the rules. That's my opinion. Because if you're wasting time, if you really want to do it and you want to get into it and you're serious about it, if you're spending time doing stuff that's not allowed in competition and gaining confidence in that, it's hurting time that you could put into gaining confidence in the techniques that are allowed in the competition. So you need to learn the rules. Then you got to go to Fly Comps. The way that the team works now, they have regions. Idaho. I should know this stuff and I don't because they started doing this right when I got off the team. Right when I retired or whatever you want to call that. I think that Idaho is not part of Idaho. Is not Utah combined with Utah. I think Idaho, maybe California. Wyoming is back with Utah. It wasn't for a minute. I don't know. You have to look at the breakdown of regions. But anyway, you have a collection of states that have minis that you'd probably have some here. For sure, you have some here. You'd have some probably if, like, let's say Oregon is in your group of states, you'd have some in Oregon or maybe in Montana, and you'd have to go to some of the mini comps and some of the regional comps. And then if you finished high enough in the minis and region to accrue enough points, then they would invite you to an interregional, they call it, where the top competitors from several regions go to a larger competition. That's just based solely on points. And then if you did that and you scored well enough, then you'd get invited to nationals down the road. It's as easy as saying you're going to do it and going and doing it. It's as hard as finding the time and finances and motivation to do it. There aren't that many people that do it. So it's not, I always joke, if I can do it and do it at a high level. I won nationals 3 times. I was silver medalist once as well. That individually, as a team, I won it more times than 3 times. If I can do it, anybody can do it. I promise. I'm not an elite athlete or anything like that. I just motivated and want to do it. Right. So it's a fun thing to do. It's good to do when you're young because it can be a little bit of an athletic event in that you're running when the fish counts are high. You are running back and forth quite a bit. It's harder to do when you get harder when it's harder for you to move and you get winded easier and your back hurts and your arms hurt and your knees hurt and you have arthritis. It's harder to do, I promise. Yep. But it's a fun thing to do. I would tell you from a standpoint of it's an odd thing to do because it's not well liked in the fly fishing world. I'm generalizing, but it's like, trying to get sponsors or something to do it is pretty tough because a lot of companies don't like it at all. But it's also really rewarding because you get to meet a whole bunch of other like-minded anglers. And man, if you make it to a world championship level, you'll have friends from all over the world and you'll be influenced by all kinds of other competitors that are just trying like crazy, like you are, to get as good at it as they can. And for me, my 2 favorite things about competing now that it's in the past for me, sorry, my voice is going to go, is the friendships I've made. And then also the learning. I learned the whole time I did it. I mean, nonstop. And I'm still learning. It's made me a way better angler. It's given me a lot of understanding about fisheries, and it gave me exposure to a whole bunch of crazy places I would have never gone because you have to. I mean, I would have never trout fished in North Carolina. I don't think I would have never trout fished probably in New York or Pennsylvania. I would have just fished, the American West for the most part. And I've fished over half of Europe because it's where the competitions are held, and crazy places like Tasmania and New Zealand and like I say, all over Europe. It's in Canada. There's all kinds of places to go. It's a fun thing to do, but it will require a lot of dedication and honestly a lot of money because it's not a lot of money, but it's going to require some financial security, I suppose, or at least some financial willingness to throw money at something that won't get you any money back.
So the noob and the knower, Pablo Signori, how did you meet him?
Pablo, so yeah, it's a podcast I do, the Noob and the Knower with Pablo. So Pablo is a friend of Fly Fish Food. So he's an artist, a musician by trade, and he's also kind of a sound engineer. So if you ever watched any of our YouTube videos where you've heard Brigham say, "That's a big brown bro," you remember that he mixes those kinds of things. So he sent a thing to Cheech, I think, originally, and kind of said, hey, I think he sent him just some copies, some cuts of things that he'd done based on audio he took from other YouTube stuff that we had up there. He said, hey, if you want to use some of these intros, go for it. And Cheech loved them. And then he said, can you do more? We'll pay you to do some other stuff like that. So that's how he became kind of a friend of the shop. And then the Noob and the Knower is Pablo's idea. He originally wanted to do fly fishing is one of his hobbies. He wanted to do a podcast, that same style podcast, named the same thing, but with one for hunting, one for fishing, one for music, one for whatever you want. Dart throwing, you know, I don't know. I don't think he throws darts, but I'm just throwing out. He thought the concept was you could take, you know, a relative expert and somebody that just knows how to engage somebody and ask questions and make it an interesting podcast for a whole bunch of different topics.
So he lives in. Illinois?
He's in Chicago. Yep.
So you guys, how do you do your?
We just do Zoom, and then we both have mics at our house, so we're recording on, you know, audio software, and then just share audio files, sort of thing. Yeah, so I got involved with it. He actually approached George Daniel first because he knew George through some other. I didn't know Pablo at all, and George, because of other commitments, couldn't do it. So then Pablo asked George who else he thought should, you know, would be a decent podcast partner, and he suggested me. George and I have been longtime friends from Team USA way back, and then Pablo reached out to me and said, "Do you want to do it?" And I said, "Yeah, let's make millions doing a podcast." You know?
It's a good podcast. I enjoy listening to it.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of you to say. It's fun. It's fun to do. It's again, love of the game. We don't make a dang thing on it, but it's okay. It's fun. It's hard to find time to do it because we're both busy and it doesn't pay any bills, right?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
How much into men only to compete?
No, there's so the US team allows, and the world championships allow men or women, and there's also a women's specific division that is all women. So they have a youth division, they call seniors division. Seniors division is 18 to 50. That's a funny name, I know. And then they have a masters division that's 50 plus. I'm almost there. I'm getting closer to that every day. I might consider competing again if I maybe down the road with the Masters. It'd be fun to just once in a while throw my hat in the ring and go see how the 50 plusers do it. But yeah, those are the divisions. So women, youth, they just call it seniors, which could be men or women. We've had women on Team USA, and we've also there've been lots of women in the competitions in just the seniors division. And then starting about maybe 5-ish, 6-ish years ago, they made just a women's only division. The U.S. women have been doing really well. They're great. Yeah, the youth and the women are doing way better than the seniors team. The seniors team is the hardest division, though. It has the most competitors and the most teams. I don't want to take anything away from the youth and the women, but they're competing in like a 8 to 12 team format instead of like a 30 to 35 team format. It's a lot harder. But yeah, there are all kinds of divisions. You could do both, and the women have been killing it. And they've been awesome. They can be. I can tell you from guiding, women are much better listeners. Even with big ears like mine, men are just not that good at it.
I will say that I've had a lot of guys. They always ask the guys at the end of the day, if they had a choice of guiding men or women, and I'm not trying to, I was just really curious.
Yeah.
When I fish, and they do a person, not one person has changed it. We'll take women any day.
Yeah.
And I said, and why is that? I could guess. I said, why is that? Men just want to toss it to the next zip code. And it's just, and women, basically you listen and you try to do what we ask you to do.
Yeah, they'll listen quite a bit. I've had all kinds of experiences either doing casting classes or fishing where half the time, it's a husband and wife or something, and the husband says, "Don't worry about me. I fish all the time. Just focus on my wife." And I'm like, okay. Next thing you know, she's up like 15-0, and she's going. He's like, "Hey, why don't you come over here for a second?" And when he'll listen, he'll listen to you for 10 minutes, and then, okay, go back with my wife, and she starts whacking him again. I had one gal I was teaching a casting class, and she'd never cast flyer before. Her husband had a whole bunch of times, and within like 30 minutes, she's out casting him. And he goes, "This is incredible. Like, I never thought my wife would be able to cast that well in her entire life." And it's like 30 minutes in, and he looks at her, he goes, "What's the magic?" She goes, "I listened to him." She goes, "I've been watching you. He tells you to do something. You just keep doing the same things over and over." Anyway, yeah. Women are very astute learners, that's for sure.
I will say this, and this is not a question or anything. Of all the different guys that we've had, and we've fished a number of places, I've only once had a woman guide.
Oh, yeah? Where was that?
That was in Gunnison.
On Gunnison. Awesome. Yeah, there aren't as many women guides, but there are some.
There are some I know they're there.
Yep.
But I haven't seen them.
Yeah. I mean, percentage.
Be more in the West.
There are, yeah. Percentage wise, it's smaller, but there are some around for sure.
Do you want to just say quick right to the string.
Yeah. Let's do it. All right. Well, for those of you who are online, thank you for watching. Hopefully you got a good nap in, and we'll see you next time.